Good evening, and welcome everyone to the special meeting of the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education for April 24th, 2023. And Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Acosta?
Here.
Mrs. Bradford?
Here.
Mrs. Burton?
Here.
Mrs. Frank?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mrs. Bonifield is present. President Johnson?
Here, we do have a quorum, thank you. This is our special meeting. We only have one item on the agenda tonight. It's a very special night for all of us in attendance. I don't see any blue slips. The second item is audience communication.
Mark, there is one. There.
There is one? Oh.
Oh, great. Bring it on up.
Bring it up, please. I'm sorry, I didn't see you sitting back there.
Don't go very far because you
Don't
won't,
go very
won't
far.
need to sit back down. Yeah, there.
Yeah, you'll come up here.
Okay.
I do have one blue slip. It is from Danielle Long. Good evening.
Good evening. Come on up. Okay.
Have a seat. Just touch that microphone. There you go. Good evening.
Good evening. Okay. My first one, so.
We don't bite.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Good. Am I good to go?
Good to go.
Okay, well, hello everyone. Thanks for having me. So my name is Danielle Long. I am a parent of a kindergartner that will be starting at Randolph Elementary in August of this year. So I'm very excited that my daughter's going to be starting there. It was a beautiful school, great learning opportunities, and the staff was really welcoming, knowledgeable, and supportive. But I am here today to talk about my concerns regarding the SAC program. My husband and I attended the parent night at Randolph, where we learned about the program. It was there that I discovered that the program has a wait list. The parents with preference are allowed to sign up first. So those parents with children who were in the program the year prior. It was also there that I learned children were bused from another school to Randolph if they made it through this tedious wait list. I hope you can imagine my shock and frankly frustration when I heard this. So not only are our chances of getting into the program low, especially if you do not sign up for full time, but there's also an added element of safety concerns with our children on buses needlessly with other drivers. We live 1 block from the school. Seems kind of silly, right, to travel our daughter to another school to come back 2 hours later, passing our house on the way. So I'm going to make a pretty frank statement here. I think most parents work. As much as we would prefer to be with our children, taking them to school, picking them up, volunteering for every class function, we live in a society that requires us to work, but also requires 2 incomes to maintain a comfortable standard of living. So quitting my job, though this was suggested to me, is not a feasible option. So I will tell you, I've spoken to numerous members of the Livonia School District who have been amazing, very helpful, and I fully believe that they want this program to be a success. However, I wouldn't consider it a success if there are long wait lists and the program isn't held at the schools where the students attend. This is where I look to you. We can't sit back and say we know it's a problem, but there's nothing we can do. I'm aware enough to know that it won't change now, but what are we doing for the future years? I was told that Randolph can't house the program at the school because they don't have an available room. Isn't school closed when the SAC program is needed? You say that there isn't enough staff. Well, I see signs for bus drivers all over the district. What about the same for the SAC program? What incentives have we offered teachers to participate? Have you polled teachers to see if they would be interested? I'd venture to guess that some would love to support the program. Have you thought about reducing the hours to get more support? These are just initial ideas, okay, that I have come up with. But what about you? How can you help make this program a success? Not only for our children, but for the parents of this community who need to work. I said my piece. Now I want to know what we can do to change this problem. And I'm here as a parent. I'm here as an advocate for Livonia Public Schools. I'm here to help if you want parents' assistance, but we've got to fix this problem. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can leave.
Okay, thank you. Look, hopefully no one watches this.
Oh, no, you're on camera.
Oh my gosh, my husband was going to record it.
No, I was going to say we didn't do our spiel about how we'll get back to her.
That's right. I think Mr. Green has already spoken.
Oh, already. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other blue slips? Seeing none, then we will move on on to the meat of our meeting. And item 3 is appointment of elementary principal. And may I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Burton.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and appoint Nicole Hunter as elementary principal at Kennedy Elementary beginning April 24th, 2023.
Support.
Stereo. I think I heard Mrs. Jarvis first. All right, so we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And I think Mrs. Keats is going to help us with this evening. Good
I
evening.
am, and I'm very excited to do so. So this is the best part of our jobs as directors of human resources, and typically, Tony and I, we alternate between secondary and elementary, and for this one, we thought, who should do the introduction? So I feel like I won the prize here in welcoming Mrs. Hunter. So I am pleased to bring before you Nicole Hunter for the position of principal at Kennedy Elementary School. So Nicole has been around for quite some time in the district, starting at Stevenson High School in the Social Studies Department, where she taught world history, AP US government, and economics. So you're going to see a theme of secondary service from Mrs. Hunter. From there, she was appointed as the AP at Churchill High School, where she has served since 2015. She served both the business office and the scheduling office, and she was certainly proud to be a part of Charger Nation. Earlier this year, we thought, what better way to introduce Mrs. Hunter to the world of K-4 than put her in an elementary school on Halloween Day? And she did so with grace, poise, and an enthusiasm that was unmatched. She served as interim principal at Kennedy since that day, and she has not looked back. We are so excited that she is bringing experience, enthusiasm, dedication. She is bringing her knowledge that she has learned at Albion with a BA in history. Most impressive is her Juris Doctor from Wayne State School of Law. She is a lawyer. In addition to her MA in Ed Leadership from Marygrove. So she has answered this call. She has found a newfound passion for all things elementary. She can now be seen wearing fun t-shirts to represent all of the holidays. She will still serve Charger Nation as she is part of the same triad, but we're thrilled to bring her forward to you tonight for the recommendation of principal at Kennedy Elementary School.
Excellent. I'll open it up to the board. Questions or comments? Mrs. Burton.
Yes, I've known Mrs. Hunter for a long time because my kids were privileged to have her as a teacher in her earlier years at LPS at Stevenson, and they thought so highly of her. And teenagers are not shy with their opinions. But it's been very, very exciting watching Nicole go through the various leadership positions in Livonia Public Schools. We are thrilled to have you at Kennedy. It's been very exciting to see what a smooth, seamless transition that was, at least from our end. And again, when people are not happy, we generally hear it like with vengeance. But when we hear crickets, it's like, okay, good, everything is going so well. So especially making a transition from secondary to elementary, that is a more unusual leap. But as Mr. Griesek, I believe it was, he and I were chatting right before the meeting, said leadership is leadership. And you know when you see good leaders. So we are just thrilled to see you in this new leadership position in Livonia Public Schools.
Thank you, Ms. Burton. Other questions?
President
Mrs.
Johnson.
Frank.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of Charger Nation, as the current president of the Churchill PTSA, we are going to miss you at Churchill. You have done an outstanding job at Churchill. And as I'm getting to know the staff there, they respect you, the kids respect you, and you are leaving a huge hole at Charger Nation. But we are thrilled for the future, and your colleagues are so excited to have you in the elementary level, so we're thrilled for you. But you will be missed at Churchill. Thank you. You're welcome.
Other questions or comments? Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, President Johnson. I just want to thank Mrs. Keats for her introduction of Mrs. Hunter and share from our perspective her growth and her continued opportunity to shine as a leader in this district at both the secondary level and the elementary level throughout our administrative leadership team. She is so well regarded for her knowledge, her compassion for students, her advocacy for staff, in her willingness to really think in creative ways to solve problems. She certainly understands when there are challenges to be faced head-on, and is willing to utilize her expertise, but also the expertise of all those around her, to help make decisions in the best interest of the children that we serve. I also want to acknowledge so many members of our Kennedy team are here this evening, and how wonderful is that to see. We had an opportunity to hear from the Kennedy staff, and we, as you know, it's an important part of our process in creating the profile of the leader for each individual school, because while many elements of principal leadership remain the same throughout the levels, certainly it was very important for us to hear directly from the Kennedy staff. And as we built that profile, I can tell you without exception, Nicole has those essential qualities that were identified by the Kennedy staff, and that was very, very important to us in this process. And they also recognize the impact she has made in a not so short time. October was a bit of time ago, but in a relatively short period of time. And so we bring forward this recommendation for appointment with great confidence and a lot of excitement, not only from, I believe, the Kennedy team, but from the administrative leadership team across the district. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Any other questions or comments? I just have a few. In the conversations that we've had over the years, what's always impressed me is your passion for the students that you teach, for your colleagues, and I think that passion is going to be brought over to Kennedy. Although we haven't voted yet, quite honestly. We're sort of looking into the future. All right, anything else? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis for the appointment of elementary principal. And Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta,
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, the motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. First of all, I have to thank the Board of Education. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Of course, Superintendent Oquist, thank you. Secondary Director Kevin Etu and Elementary Director Bill Green, as well as the rest of the cabinet team, for coming up with this idea to have me step into an elementary position from my secondary role. When I was approached in October, I had no idea really what life-changing opportunity they had given to me. So I really will be forever grateful for them believing in me and giving me such a unique opportunity. To my CHS colleagues, I see you back there. Friends and community, thank you for your support and well wishes. When it was announced that I was going to be recommended to the board for this position, the number of emails and texts was overwhelming, but it really was a wonderful reminder of the lasting relationships that I've been lucky enough to make over the years at Churchill. And of course, the admin team at CHS, they have been so supportive, and the friendships that have made have been lifelong. I just hope that once in a while I get invited back to the epic CHS lunches. So admin lunches, I want my, my invite still. And then, of course, thank you to the Kennedy staff, students and family. They have really welcomed me with open arms. This has been quite an amazing group of people, I have to say. Beginning my elementary journey on Halloween, like we just noted, some might have predicted that it would be a one-day elementary journey. But I came back on November 1st, and I quickly realized that I had found a new home. I never would have predicted this career path, and I owe all the gratitude in the world to the Kennedy friends that I've made for believing in me. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention the wonderful team of elementary principals, I see some of them back there. They have been so welcoming and helpful. Every one of them lets me pick their brain and even puts up with my group texts about whether or not to have outdoor recess. So I appreciate, I didn't know that was such a big deal, but it is. Miss Wilson back there knows we're rule followers, so I appreciate them putting up with that. Lastly, I'd like to thank my family. My daughters are here from track practice, and my husband and my son are at soccer practice. So I appreciate them supporting me. I'm not sure they believed me when I said I was going to elementary school, but now I think they realize it's a perfect fit. So I look forward to many, many years as preparing our Kennedy Stars to be the best Churchill Chargers that they can be. So I really thank you all for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. You all know that you have to wait through the next meeting before you can leave, right? All right, we're at the end of this agenda. We will be back shortly. We're going to take a few minutes to congratulate our appointee this evening. So at this point, we are adjourned. Thank you. Good evening, and if we're going to welcome you back if you were present at our meeting just a few moments ago. This is the Committee of the Whole meeting for April 24th, 2023 for the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education. For those of you who are watching at home, if you want to follow our agenda, you can go to our website, which is livoniapublicschools.org, highlight over the board tab, and just follow along down there, and you'll be able to find our agendas. For those in the audience who want to follow along, we have agendas out the left-hand door, and if you turn to your right, you have agendas and blue slips. For those of you who have not tuned into a Committee of the Whole meeting before, this is the meeting that you really want to tune into, because this is where we get into the items that will be brought before the board at a voting meeting, or what we call our regular meeting. Those items have probably already been brought to us at least once before at our study session, and this is where we really get into the nuts and bolts of what's going to be brought before us. With that, we'll get into our agenda, and our first item is audience communication. I do not have any blue slips. Are there any blue slips in the audience? I do not see any, so we will move to item 2, the Committee of the Whole. We do not have any items on Committee of the Whole. Is there anything to add, Mrs. Oquist?
No, President Johnson, thank you.
Thank you. That will take us to item 3, our Finance Committee, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Bonifield.
I don't think I've ever been first. Okay, so we have 2 items tonight, and Mr. Francis is going to assist us with those. The first one is item A, sale of bonds, second series.
Evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Congratulations to Mrs. Hunter. She's going to do fantastic. Kennedy. Actually, we're going to probably tag team a little bit just to go through the items. The first item that we're talking about is the sale of bonds. It's the second series. As the board may very well remember, almost a year ago exactly, the first series of the 2021 bond initiative, the first series of the $186 million bond initiative was sold in June of 2021. This is the second series to be sold, and it's scheduled to be sold on May 4th. It's upcoming, unbelievably. Next week is May, if anyone hasn't looked at a calendar. So that's going to be a $70 million scheduled sale on May 4th. And essentially, I know that Mrs. Smith had written you a pretty extensive memo, but in the board, most of the board members, or actually probably all the board members, have gone through some series sales of bond. But essentially, for those watching at home, we do work with our bond counsel, Troon, and financial advisors, PFM, and the underwriter, JP Morgan Chase. All of this is really a well-orchestrated sale, and we had actually a good interest rate for this series. I do have the, what did I do with that?
3.68.
Thank you, I had it right here. 3.68 was the true interest cost, and the third and final series, just upcoming, would be sold in 2024, because again, we had always planned for that. Now, as a reminder for the community, this is a 20-year bond, which actually keeps the overall cost of it for the community down. And speaking of keeping costs down for the community, I'm going to pass it over to Mrs. Oquist to talk about some nice news that we had, some very impressive news, actually, for the district.
Yes, so as you know, this is part of a negotiated sale, and we do rely on our financial advisors, PFM, pretty significantly throughout this process, as well as the other folks that Mr. Francis mentioned. So it is a multi-month process, and we have been going through this process and reviewing documents, having meetings with our financial advisors, and part of that process is requesting an updated ratings for the district. And we do that through Standards & Poor's, and we have done that at least twice prior in the past, I'd say 6 years or so. We have had one ratings increase during that time, and other than that, it has stayed stable. And in those ratings calls, we are asked about a wide variety of items with regard to Primarily, our budgeting practices and protocols, our fund balance, our enrollment, our planned use of fund balance, and our planned expenditures for the coming year, whether or not we're in negotiations with bargaining groups, whether or not we expect any significant revenue adjustments, whether or not you have any legal or court cases pending. There are a wide variety. It's usually about an hour-long call, and they detail through a number of different items to determine whether or not you are continue to be a stable rating for your district, whether or not, we've seen certainly in this financial environment, we've seen some rating decreases. But in this particular case, they took into account all of the work that the district has done under our board's leadership and the strong work of our chief financial officer, Mrs. Smith. And we were able to garner an upgrade in the district's credit rating to A+ with a stable outlook. And so what that has done is we were able to secure a lower interest rate on the sale of bonds, and ultimately that will save the taxpayers in our district almost $1 million in the repayment of the interest costs of borrowing. And so we will be certainly sharing this news with our taxpayers. We've shared it with the board previously, but we wanted to share it at this meeting because, again, this is the second series sale. The third series in '24 will be for the final $38 million, and then we will have sold all of our bonds to garner the proceeds in order to do the work that is part of our bond project. So we are very, very proud of that. I want to once again acknowledge the tremendous work of this board. I know we work very closely as a team, and we work closely with the members of our cabinet team. And I know you certainly have a very close eye on not just the short-term financial outlook of this district, but really the long-term stability. And what that has allowed us to do in a short period of time, and I say short, over 8 or 10 years, is not only grow our fund balance, but we have also been able to negotiate contracts that really were able to very, very appropriately acknowledge and recognize our hardworking staff, but also grow programming and supports for our students. And I really think overall, the fact that those things happen concurrently, even in some difficult fiscal times, and even knowing that some of the short-term funding through ESSERS is going away, that the district was still able to garner that increased rating is something that the board should be very, very proud of. And we are certainly happy to share with you and with our taxpayers. So we will be bringing this to you on our board, on our regular board meeting for you to ratify the sale of bonds. And so we'd like to add this to our next meeting agenda.
Okay, any questions?
Just a thank you.
Absolutely.
Very good work.
That's a tremendous savings.
It is.
Excellent. Okay, we will swiftly move on to LPS merchandise purchase.
Yes, I know that Mrs. Smith had spoken with the board at the last meeting that we had, which was a study session about this. It is National PTA designates 1 week in May. It's a Teacher Appreciation Week. And in preparation for that, the district always wants to try to find a special way. And what we've done the past few years it's drawn a lot of excitement. Many people are pleased with it, and it's, of course, the spirit wear. So we're bringing to you the Board of Education to give you the information and the approval of a not to exceed $100,000, which is a breakdown of about approximately $50 per employee. And to give you some background, we're using our partner from last year again, MBS. MBS Inc. is in Commerce Township, and they are basically full service doing this. As far as they take care of, we picked some items, we had a catalog, we picked items that will be on there for staff. They then will make sure that they answer any employees who reach out with questions. They'll answer those questions. They're going to do the embroidering on the gear that is chosen. They individually bag and tag for each person what they've ordered. They get delivered out to each of the buildings. All this is done by them. We don't have to do a thing. All we have to do is get online and click, and we'll get our orders to our folks. Some of the items that will be in there, choices include Under Armour jackets, quarter zips, polos, or T-shirts, and there's also a Columbia vest. So the vest was neat. We saw a quick shot of that. It's something that's new. It hasn't been offered in the past. So something that we hope that with the variety of it, some folks take an interest in and order. So we're excited to bring this to our staff, and we will be putting it on the regular voting meeting again. It's going to be a not to exceed $100,000 on that average per employee.
And I just wanted to thank the board for your agreement to allow us to go ahead with that. So as we talked about at the study session, to give us the nod to continue that, and we'll formally vote on it next week, because that allowed us to get that information out, as you know, last week to our wonderful staff, and with our hope of the goods arriving during the month of May. And so that allowed us to do that. So thank you for giving us that nod of approval to go ahead and get the process started.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. In the past, we've seen the items that they've had, and they are quality items to begin with. They do a fabulous job, not only with the item itself, but the embroidering is fabulous. And I've already had some feedback this year already about how appreciative people are that this is coming back. So it's a wonderful thing for our staff.
Good.
Mrs. Burton?
I agree. We try to do nice things for our staff. I know the PTAs also do phenomenal work during staff appreciation. This is such a win-win. It's a wonderful gesture to our staff, like you said, President Johnson, especially because they are nice quality items. That's, to me, what makes a huge difference. But it's also exciting to go into buildings, and almost every single time, we see either a few to almost an entire staff wearing their LPS logo of choice, logo items of choice, which is just really nice. It's terrific for, I think, the camaraderie and the team building of the each individual building, and it certainly is a nice gift for our staff, who are very, very well deserving. So I think it's a fabulous idea, and kudos to whoever came up with it a few years ago.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much, Mr. Francis.
Thank you,
and Mrs. Oquist, and that will conclude finance.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. That'll take us to item 4, our building and site, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Burton.
Thank you. We have a number of items, and Mr. Francis can get comfy in his chair right there. The first item on our agenda this evening under Building and Site is our quarterly dashboard report, which we've been now seeing and tweaking for many years, but it's a terrific tool. So,
Yes, with the turn of every season, the excitement grows, not for winter to spring or spring to summer, but rather Q1 to Q2 to Q3, and Brian Weber coming to do the quarterly dashboard.
Oh, the lead-in.
So with no further ado, I will introduce Mr. Brian Weber, someone who we all know very well from Plant Moran Cressa, to review the Q1 for 2023 quarterly dashboard. And I believe we already passed one out for everybody, right?
Thank
Sir?
Thank you. Yeah, I saw the crowd here today. I thought it was for my dashboard. Everybody seemed to have left, so apparently not. Yeah, same format. We'll go through and ask questions as needed as we talk through this. But top left, same thing. We still have our goals and objectives that we put in our bond marketing campaign, everything that was on the ballot. We like to focus on that, so that's there. On the right-hand side, you'll see some financials we'll go through, and then finish up with some critical items, and then program phasing and schedule discussion, just to give a highlight of how we're doing out there. So starting with the good old cost summary, just a refresher. Working across the top with the columns. Current budget for each one of our categories is column A. Column B would be the current contracts or purchase orders that have been approved and signed to date. The actuals paid in column C is money that's been spent on those contracts. Column D, just the subtraction of actual contracts to what's been paid. E is our forecasted contracts for the coming years. These are ones that have not been issued yet, but we know are coming down the path as we continue working through the program.
Those are all the estimates, right? right?
Yes, those are estimated costs that we anticipate moving forward. Column F is the unallocated reserve. Normally, there would be some here sitting with owner contingencies. Given our previous award approvals, we know we've been dealing with cost escalation issues, so we are running thin right now, and just wanted to show that right now we don't have anything set aside for the unallocated reserve, but we're managing through it as we work through. And then column G is our just forecasted over-under, so based on our forecast, we're understanding what scope's left. We feel we're gonna use all of the 186 million, and then, as discussed at our last meeting, there will be some offsets with other funding sources that we'll talk through along the way, where we can tap into other resources. Couple of highlights for this. I won't go through the painstaking of every number, but some of the big updates since our last quarter. Professional services, contracts increased here by about $300,000. That was just working with our current team members for material testing services with NTH, who we've partnered with and worked with for many years. RTA, our roof consultant, we've also hired them, who you normally know from our sinking fund program that does our roof design. We also bring them aboard on the new robotics and early childhood to be a third party to make sure we're getting the quality on those roofs as well. So they've been hired in the last couple months for the bond program.
Just to put a finer point on that, remember that while we've been re-roofing over the past several years and continue to re-roof our buildings that we've had, those are 2 new builds, so those would be new roofs. We want to make sure that we have construction management over those as well.
Yep.
Quality control.
That is correct. And then the other big change would be the construction. So our 5th category down is now $94 million under current contracts and purchase orders. That jumped up by the $27 million that was awarded previously to Early Childhood Center. So we have our contracts in place now. So just a kind of a snapshot where we're at. The $94 million in column B against the 130 budget, we're sitting at about 72% complete for current contracts. So in 2+ years on our program, we've moved quite along at a good pace here. And with the mindset of understanding we are, as Phil had presented, about getting bond dollars sooner, trying to avoid cost escalations and spend some of this money faster to take advantage of having that money available faster as well.
We've really front-loaded quite a bit in this bond, and the board knows that and understands that. Just want to say, for those watching at home, I mean, we have 2 very large new build items, which was the robotics center as well as the early childhood center. Those are under contract. The board has approved those contracts. So those are 2 big items. Plus, the Phase 1 and Phase 2, which is coming up this summer, those are all under contract. But the air conditioning, all of that work, instead of spreading it over 5 or 6 years, remember, we brought that forward to complete in 2 years. So we really have, if it was a prize fight, we're taking our hits in the first and second round, but it all will end up making the latter rounds, easier to manage, know where we're at, and have so much more done early on based upon what we saw over the past few years of the escalating costs to say, let's get this work done and let's get as much of it ready to go now. And that's where you see these numbers, which in really moving into the summer of '23, which would only be Phase 2 overall, as if you looked at it only from the renovations, we have those other 2 very large projects that are out there.
So in short, we're getting our money's worth out of our partners in French Associates, TMP, and Clark Construction. They've been quite busy the last few months
Everybody
here,
hit the
so-
ground running.
Yep. So, any questions on this top table before I move along? Alrighty. Moving down to the cash flow, just to finish out the finances, this ties into what Phil's presentation was with Series 1. One update here that's worth noting, more good news. Our second row, the projected earned interest fees of $1 million. Last time I was in front of you, this was about $750,000. So based on the market right now and the investments with Ms. Smith and PFM, we're able to capture another about $250,000 in earned interest that's sitting there. So it's being invested properly and things are good. So just wanted to highlight that.
Brian, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
The earned interest, the Series 1 shows $1 million bit over, and the totals, it shows $745,000.
That is a typo by me. I will correct that before we get it. It should be $1 million. That was the
Okay.
last update there. Alrighty, moving on to critical items, just kind of a high-level update, and once again, ask as needed. So our main things we're monitoring right now, construction market right now is still busy. Labor is in high demand. That we haven't slowed down a lot. Metro Detroit is busy, not only in K-12, but downtown, a lot of projects are still coming out. So we're working very diligently and make sure when we do have bid packages coming out that we're reaching out to a lot of trade contractors. So That's one thing we stay in the forefront of our mind. Also, lead times for heavy mechanical equipment, electrical equipment, we're still pushing out over a year for some of this major equipment, which is absolutely unheard of compared to a couple years ago. So we're planning appropriately, looking at pre-purchased packages for next summer's work already. We have our early childhood package. We've already released a lot of that big equipment ahead of time, working with our utility companies as well. So
When he says next summer, he means 24?
yes,
Because even though in our minds, 23 is already.
yes, thanks for clarifying it. Yes, we're already looking at 2024 equipment to order as needed for long lead items. So it's been a constant last few years. It's something that remains constant right now. And then as far as cost escalation goes, we have finally seen some relief during the COVID years. Every time I came up here, it seems like we were increasing by 10 to 15 to 20%, but we are starting to see some normalcy and easing in consumer pricing right now too.
Brian, backing up just a moment to things that we're ordering ahead of time, what is our plan for, should some of those items then arrive a little bit early? I mean, I know we're not going to get them 6 to 8 months early. We're ordering them a year out, some of these things, because they're taking that long.
Right.
But I'm sure with some of those things, we're going to get them then perhaps a little bit before we need them.
Correct.
Where are they going?
So we have a couple options. We have yards with our contractors. Some of them have large enough yards that we can store them there, insured areas, make sure that there's insurance on the property so they're covered properly. Sometimes we work with Mr. Lau's team to see if there's capacity here or on site, but we've done multiple things. Unfortunately, it hasn't been too common that happens, but
Right,
we are prepared just in case they do show up that we do have homes for it.
Okay.
And for instance, with the furniture, we did order some things ahead of time with the furniture for the media centers, and those companies have agreed to hold on to those materials until we need them at no
Okay.
cost.
Yep.
So just, each one of those
Sounds like a
is something
combination.
that we look at each time
Mhm.
to determine who would be able to hold on to that. But it's a great question, because we certainly couldn't take on all of it.
Right, not all of it.
And we certainly don't want to take on the cost, but I do think that companies have been more flexible in working with us on saying, if it does come in, we will hold that for you. And that has been helpful, because, as you know, we've brought some things to you in phases based on the first summer, knowing what needed some additional lead time, so we really got on those as quickly as possible for this summer, and we'd like to continue that cycle until things start to get back into a normal cadence as far as time frame and supply chain issues abate a little bit.
And to your point, it's a much better problem to try and figure out what to do with it when it comes earlier
Oh,
than
yeah.
it is when they say it's 40 more weeks out. And,
Yeah,
so
it's-
it's a good problem to have right now.
It is, yeah, but occasionally something for probably 8
Yeah.
out of the 10 that are pushing that outer limit. 1 or 2 are gonna show up, maybe even 2 months before we thought,
Yeah.
but gotta put it somewhere for 2
That
months.
furniture is a great example. It's a really good example.
Okay, thank you.
Touching on the good old air conditioning that we all know has been a priority from day one. So an update on that for the phase one, the 2022 sites. We have received all the equipment necessary, the infrastructure. We finalized installation over this past spring break that just finished. So we have crews on site right now as weather allows. It's a process that we have the equipment there, but to fully charge these air conditioning units, it's temperature sensitive. So we need typical spring weather to do that, 60 to 70 degree weather. So as we look ahead to weather, the crews are aware, and they put the appropriate workforce in the buildings on the days allowable. That is the priority for those crews, to get those air conditioning systems working in a classroom. So if we do get spikes in weather, we do ask for patience, because it takes time, and we need consecutive days or a group of days in that temperature range. So if we get our happy 80, 85 degrees, it's just not enough time to catch up if we don't have those days leading into those warmer days.
It's the question that comes up from staff, and they say, I know it's here, how come it's not on? Because it's not actually completely done. This has to happen, and unfortunately, it's not. The one thing that we need, as Mr. Weber said, is a 60-degree day. And by the time you get to around Michigan, it goes from a 40-degree day to an 80-degree day in 24 hours, and then people say, I'm warm in here, but I do really plead for patience from folks, because it is a process. We are at the mercy of what the weather is. We need that time at a minimum, outside temperature, to get an opportunity to charge these, to energize these, and then we do have that third-party balancing that also has to occur. Our goal is to get them up and running when it's supposed to be normally a much warmer temperature. It's just we've had in March and in April some odd days.
Mr. Francis or Mr. Robert, either one, is that something that has to happen each spring? Or is that happen only
for
at the beginning
new.
of purchasing the
Yes,
new one? And
for
then once
new.
we do it once, we don't have to wait any longer?
That is correct. We were at the mercy of waiting for the equipment we needed. We couldn't finish it last summer. Typically, you start in the spring, you can finish when and that's what will happen with the 2023 sites, is that we're already putting equipment on the roof. They got a heck of a good start for the next summer. So that'll all occur over the summer. It's just that us waiting for pieces and parts due to the supply chain issues, we couldn't get that until later in the fall last year when the weather was not there. So now we're just at the mercy of the spring once we have all our pieces, and now they're doing that startup process.
Okay,
And
This
typical
should
sit-
be the only year when we should.
okay,
have
it's a
that.
one-time
Should-
startup.
Yeah,
Correct.
the typical, when we would finish in August and school starts in September, September's still plenty warm to now do all this type of finish work to get it energized and balanced.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we're dealing with spring, and spring around here is
And it
tough.
just-
45 day, yeah.
And I don't know if I misheard, it is not a typical it's not an annual maintenance thing or
No.
anything. It's a
It's
one-time,
a
one-time
first-time
startup.
startup for this
Okay,
equipment.
thank you. Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Now, are we able to communicate that out not only to our staff, but maybe to our parents to let them
That was-
know that this is why
that was
this is
my question.
happening? Because, you know, that they'll get these warm days and they'll be wondering why we don't have it.
We can
Maybe
send
A little
something.
bit of an explanation.
Yeah, we can send something. Now, in March and early April, even when you have those types of days, we typically don't have our units firing up on a random day that happens to pop. It usually
Sure,
gets going.
well, that would be
with-
nice to
yeah.
kind of give them a
We-
little
no,
heads up on what the
100%.
process is. so that
100%
they-
agree.
They
Mhm.
understand, because otherwise they'll be calling,
Mhm.
you know, or asking why this isn't happening, and I think that would be helpful for them to know.
With any luck, it'll be 40 until June. and it will be-
Oh, Mrs. Acosta?
So just to piggyback on what Mrs. Bradford said, what was the expected date for this to be up and running
This spring.
In the spring.
this
Yep.
spring?
Yep.
Okay.
We had said last year, and before we even started last summer's work, it will not be turned on in the fall of '22. We know it won't be ready. The aim would be spring of '23.
Okay. So then, yes, the parents are,
Yeah, they'll
Yep.
they're watching.
thank
All
you.
right, any other questions at this point? Okay, carry on.
Alrighty. I'll jump around just a little bit, but since we started talking about 2023 renovations, we are, like I said, they got an early start with the air conditioning as the priority, so there's already actually equipment on the roof in some of these buildings. Coordinating with all the buildings to make sure we're not disturbing classes. And we've actually worked with all the building staff here at each building and also at the admin building, but we're planning on taking over some areas early, starting on May 1, for some library media centers. Kitchens are gonna shut down early where it was feasible and manageable for each building. So a lot of good work going on. We're getting a good head start on 23 renovations as well, even before the summer break. Just, it'll help take the burden off that heavy summer load and hopefully have a successful summer. And with a shortened summer we have this year, it'll help the crews a lot.
Yeah, and I appreciate Mr. Weber and our bond team's work with Clark, because when we were able to get the approval for the prior to Labor Day start, while that was good news because that was the plan and that was what we were seeking, as you know, in 1 week, especially at that time of year, a lot happens. So losing that week is really something they've had to plan for. And so they've really gotten started on some pretty significant items. Doesn't mean it won't still be a race to the finish, but certainly them not having the opportunity until and being able to wait until after Labor Day certainly requires a lot of pre-planning and thought on their part.
One other question, kitchens, if I remember correctly, the work that we need to do in kitchens, we're gonna be doing some food prep in other buildings and transporting it over to the buildings where kitchens are being worked on, is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, we've worked with Ms. Schuhart and her team and understanding there's gonna be logistics.
And the principals have already sent out, those that are affected have already sent out information to their parents. We're
Okay,
letting them
good.
do that locally, because the schools
Perfect.
might have different dates, et cetera. So, Ms. Jenkins had worked with those folks with regard to putting an email together, sending it out, and understanding this is how it'll work.
Good, those are the ones who need to know.
Yes.
All righty.
All right, jumping down to the LCTC robotics renovation. As you guys were able to tour a few weeks back, we've made quite a bit of headway on that project, and everything's on schedule right now, and they continue to move forward at a good pace here. So we are forecasting that to be complete for the fall semester, and everything's looking good out there right now. So any questions on robotics? I think it was a very, very informative walk, and everybody enjoyed it. It's a heck of a space out there. And then Phase 2A, Livonia Early Childhood Center. If anybody's driven by, you will now see construction fence at the perimeter there on Newburgh. They have stripped the site of the topsoil, and they're actually starting foundations today, so, for the new portion of the building. So, a lot of heavy equipment out there right now. Good start. We had a little bit of rain to start, but that's dried out, and they're able to get back to work. So, we've kicked off that program as planned, and they're moving forward out there. Finishing up with the last two phases that we have noted here, we did pull ahead some doors and hardware upgrades. This is work that was planned for 24-25 renovations that were prioritized just from a matter of getting some of the door hardware that is not consistent in the district, make that consistent. It's a win-win to pull that ahead. It also takes some of the load off those summer works that we can use in the fall, winter of the upcoming season, where we should have a better pool of workers to take care of that, where it doesn't need to be summer work, and get in on off shift and take care of some of those issues. So.
Okay.
And then the last one is our Phase 3, our 2024 renovations that I had said is next summer, but I'm 1 year ahead. But we are in the design phase. We will have a schematic. Our initial schematic review is scheduled for next week. We actually talked about some pool work with each of the high schools this morning. So our design is well on our way for 2024 renovations as well. So all good news.
Terrific.
Some people live in the past, we live in the future.
Yes. With this department, yep. Questions or comments? Mrs. Frank?
Thanks so much for this. This is my first time seeing this new format, and it is fantastic. It is color-coded, and it really is easy to read, and so helpful to have everything at a glance. So thank you. I really, it's a great format to just keep us looking exactly where our numbers are lining up. Just real quick, about the doors and hardware, is that any safety things
Yeah.
going on? Are we keeping in mind our safety
Yeah.
kind of goals as we're replacing just windows and that sort of thing?
No,
Is it-
yeah, what we're doing is with the door and hardware is we, knowing that we still have multiple phases to do renovations. The original plan was go to a building to do its renovations, its LMCs, et cetera, the toilet rooms, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, we would find those types of doors. It's rarer a whole door, but when we find that, we replace a door. Mostly it's the hardware. But just trying to be, again, forward-thinking for those spaces that, we're talking about classrooms, generally occupied rooms that get used throughout the day, et cetera. We're trying to find those, pull them forward instead of waiting till 24, 25 in future years, pull those spaces forward. And if it still has a traditional knob and key lock for a classroom somewhere, we want to swap that out for the flip lock. If it's a push bar whether it be a science classroom or an LMC or wherever that is, we want to get that new hardware to give you the thumb turn on the push bar, et cetera. So we just decided as a team, let's pull this aside. It's going to be a double bonus. One, it's really, number one, the safety and security, bringing that forward and telling folks who might not be done until 2025, hey, just wait a couple more years. We can do that sooner. And then the dual effect is what Mr. Weber had already mentioned. We can do this not in the summer. We can put out a bid package, get potentially more bidders on it, and then get them to do some work at a time where they're usually really jammed in the summer and less busy over the fall and winter.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments or questions? All righty. I think that takes care of quarterly dashboard.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is Early Childhood Center roofing rebid. Mr. Francis?
As the board may recall, in the full package of the bid package that you approved for the ECC, we did have the new roof, which we just talked about a moment ago, saying that we are getting new roofs. We didn't have any bidders at that time, and that wasn't from lack of interest in the job, et cetera. When we reached out, we learned that a lot of the companies that the district works with, they really specialize in those re-roofing jobs. We have a handful of companies that have been on our roofs, been in this district, done repairs, done re-roofs. That's sort of their bailiwick. And also timing, as we said, that timing of everybody wants to get their bids out around the same time so they can be early, but when everybody's early, then you're really kind of on time. Anyway, we did put that out to bid. We had told the board we're gonna put this one back out. So that is what you have in front of you. And we did get good coverage. We had 5 companies put in bids on this. And we do have A-Win Roofing LLC. So A-Win, it's really the name of the founder and the president and owner. And they were the low responsible bidder. That amounts $1,667,819. And that's right on budget. That's including the contingency, the actual construction, and the fees. So that's already lumped all together. They're really 1.4 and some change
That's correct.
on hard construction with their information. So where we are, and just to give a little background, we did post-bid interviews. We have not used A-Win Roofing in the past. We don't have a direct relationship with the company, but we always want to make sure we do our due diligence. So being very satisfied by the post-bid interview process and them answering all the right, all the questions the right way, having the manpower, having the product, et cetera, we then looked at some folks in the area that they have worked with. And I know that Clark Construction had reached out and gotten favorable reviews. I reached out to a local district that they're working with and got favorable reviews. Basically, the person I spoke to said, yeah, go for it. And we've had good success. They're very responsive, et cetera. So we've done what we believe to be the proper due diligence, both directly with the company as well as with references. And we would be, we confidently recommend A-Win Roofing for this job to the board.
Mr. Weber, could you spend just a minute, and Mr. Francis referenced this, why some companies don't want to commit to a new roof or a new build, and some of the challenges with the unknown timelines,
Yep.
as opposed to committing to summer work for re-roofing? Just so, as you recall, when we had 0 bids, I know that was concerning. And so if you could just spend a minute for the board as well as the benefit of the community.
Yep. Yeah, so we do have strong relationships, given all the work we've done, so and plenty of resources that we can reach out to. And it's just that is, the structure of the companies that do these summer programs have a workforce of manpower that they know they can keep busy. And it's bookended by the start of, or the finish of school and the start of school. They know they can dedicate their team to that. There is concerns with that type of a setup in the structure of that company, that on a new build, there's potential, there's delays in the construction process, and they aren't able to adapt as well as other companies that are set up for that. So that was one of the main reasons that we found out that it wasn't something that they were all reaching towards bidding on. So our typical pool, of the 5 bidders, 4 of them have bid on the district, so it's not as if they've all abandoned us by any means. It's just not their bread and butter for the company. So no ill will or anything like that. It's not as if we had lost interest, just how they're structured and how much work they've already picked up in that time frame. Or some of them, like I said before, it is still a busy time, and they had filled their books. So it's just a different mindset with a new construction versus a renovation or a tear off over a summer break, was the big reason that we found out for the initial response.
Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you. I noticed in some of these roofing bids, there was a big discrepancy in pricing. Is there a reason for that, or do we know it's just the way they bidded it out?
There's multiple reasons in that. Some of these firms are union, some are non-union. That's not all of it, but there's also labor rates there. Some just go at it a different way of, same to what we were talking about, it's a re-roof company versus a new roof. They get a little bit pricier just for the unknowns. And then it's just a matter of how busy they are. They have every right to put as much fee or whatever they want on it, so.
Okay.
Yeah, there's
So we
multiple
feel
factors.
confident the pricing that
We do.
we are received.
Yes,
as-
our second place bid, so we had 2 bids that were very tight.
Very tight.
I
Division
did see
7 was
that.
second place. So if you remember, we
Makes
had.
you sound familiar.
Division 7 actually bid on our summer re-roofs last summer. We elected not to take it because they were unknown. It was a lot of square footage for Kennedy and Stevenson. but they were also low at the robotics center. We basically said, hey, if you guys can prove you're up to it, here's robotics as your test. They've performed extremely well out there. So they were second place, but we know that's a strong company and performed well. So we feel confident that they were close enough with our low bidder that it's a good number.
I
Okay,
think the
great,
other
thank
thing
you.
is, as I saw that as well and was concerned about that, when I looked back to where our team, with a lot of knowledge about this, had budgeted, they were within $7,000 of that. So where some of the other bidders were up to $1.5 million or more higher, that would have far exceeded what we had budgeted, even with the cost escalations of which we're aware. So it gave me a greater level of comfort knowing that we were within, what our bond team and PMC had budgeted for this, and actually pretty much right on target with that. And so it really, in all essence, made the others look quite a bit out of whack.
Yeah.
And just, we mentioned this briefly in a different context, but RTA, as we talked about during the quarterly dashboard, will be doing quality control on that roof. I mean, so we don't just say, have at it and hope it goes well. We're definitely staying on top of it. That's what RTA's job is. They know our roofs very well. They know the roofing industry for decades and decades. So we have Clark Construction, who's representing LPS. We have RTA representing LPS directly on the roof. And then our team also, Harry Lau, his team goes out there and checks on things.
So lots of eyes.
We got a lot of
Lots of
eyes out
eyeballs.
there. That Newburgh Road, I think we're gonna have a lot of eyes on what's going on over the next several months.
And the last point, there's also our references we reached out to previously completed work. They are working under CMs that we're all familiar with that has a due diligence process, and we got positive feedback from those CMs as well. So it's not as if they were working directly for owners. It's people that we know that we've worked for that we touch base with too. So all positive feedback.
Very good. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Brian, in your letter, breaking down the cost, of the $1.487 million, it says inclusive of a $50,000 winter conditions allowance.
Yes.
What exactly is that?
So that is in the case of, this work is planned to start in October, November timeframe. If we get any wacky weather out there, temperature conditions, whether it's temporary protections or there's means and methods or different products that tolerate lower temperatures. If we start creeping into colder temperatures, there are cost factors that we hold that money aside. They have their base bid of what it is, but if there's conditions that they can't control and we got to maintain that schedule, we have set aside specific money to adapt to those conditions that we're not putting in their contract, but we would have set aside available if we need to adapt to it.
So if we don't have those winter conditions, let's assume it's a really warm fall, winter, and those conditions don't arise, is this something then that is like a contingency?
It is. It is.
Okay.
It is.
More of like an allowance or a contingency.
It's a specific contingency. It is not theirs. They have to prove that they're using it. We approve it.
Okay.
With Mr. Lau's team, Mr. Francis, before any dollar spent, we talk as a team. Is it needed or not? If it's not used, 100% comes back to the
Okay,
district.
great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right. That concludes Early Childhood Center roofing rebid, and we are on to item C, the asbestos abatement at Frost 2021 bond.
I'd like to ask for B to be on the next week's regular, okay. Asbestos abatement at Frost, we did just preface saying, yes, it's only one building. We did quite a bit of abatement during the 2013 bond renovations. We did not do the hallway area. This is the space throughout Frost, still has the original grid up there and lighting. So as you may recall, we had brought that forward for Frost this summer in their bid pack for renovations. So we do have some abatement in some areas over at Frost. So this is not a super large package for abatement. We've certainly seen in the past through the 2013 bond, much more abatement required. So that's why we're seeing the number as it is, $47,400 to environmental maintenance engineers. We did get good coverage on this one. You can see from the bidders, we had 2, 4, 6, 7 bidders on this. Really, we had we interviewed the 2 low bidders, And we have worked and are comfortable with, environment maintenance engineers. And with regard to the cost being lower, it really was more of a function of they had the manpower. But the two low bidders just had the better manpower, and they were very comfortable, even with each other's bids, saying, yeah, that's close to mine, et cetera. Whereas other companies were likely needing to work overtimes and had some other issues. Their numbers were higher, so we're very comfortable. It makes sense, the amount based of the bid based upon the amount of abatement that we're looking for. The other ones were really overly inflated.
Questions or comments on this item? Mrs. Bonnefield?
Just to reassure our parents out there in the frost in the hallways, just if you can mention a little bit about the making sure the kids are safe and that the environment's cleaned up and stuff like that.
So having asbestos untouched is not of any harm to anybody, and we would not be going in there and doing any work disturbing that until the school is clear. Everything that's done is obviously overseen by not only rules and regulations, but Arch Environmental, who, again, similar to other companies that we talk about, is representing LPS. They are the professionals in this field. They make sure that the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, all the safety precautions are followed, and they manage that project with regard to any abatement. And we do that in any time that we are abating asbestos in any of our buildings. We follow all of the rules and regulations, and we manage those companies.
Following up on that, is that work that's being done in the summer when our students are not in the building, or when is it being done?
Do you know the timing of that one?
This will be prior to, but it is isolated areas that are not during school and not, it is an isolated area of the building that is not going to be.
It'd be unaffected.
Yeah, unaffected or no interactions with students in those areas.
Okay, that's what we're looking for. Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? All righty, on to item D, Rico copier contract amendment.
And
Mr.
I think-
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, you can, yeah. Thank you very much.
Are you all
sir.
set, Mr. Weber?
Thank you, Brian.
Mr. Weber.
Thank you. I'm going to invite
Have a great
Mr.
evening.
Tim Klan, Administrator of Information Technology for Livonia Public Schools, to come join me for the next couple of items.
Good evening.
Hi, Tim.
Do you know how work this is technical?
Oh, is that how that works? Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we have a planned item from the 2021 bond, and that would be the multifunction copiers and printers that we have in this building and in all the buildings around the district. We have, Rico is the company that we received those multifunction printers and copiers from in the 2013 bond. Mr. Klan and IDS, they had conversations with Rico, and they came up with what I thought to be a pretty clever idea to try to extend the life of the machines that we currently have for as long as possible. And I'll allow Mr. Klan to run through that idea with you, but essentially, we're trying to say, we're gonna do this instead of all at one time, now replacing everything, or waiting and seeing things fail towards the end of the bond period. We're gonna came up with a little plan with Rico to use and extend some things. So you wanna go run everybody through that real quick?
Yeah. So as you can imagine, we've got roughly 100 copiers throughout the district. And in certain areas, the copiers get heavier use. In certain areas like the print shop and some parts of certain buildings, depending on where staff tend to
Yeah. If
to
you go to
go.
a K4, a lot of the folks go into the main office and they use that machine, and so does just basically everyone in the building, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so we've got a lot of our copiers or about, well, not a lot, 25% or so, we're well over the 2
2 million.
count, which is the point at where they start looking at wanting to replace them just due to the amount of maintenance that ends up taking place at that point.
We get a lot of service calls on those, and they track
Yeah.
all those service calls, so they know which ones have not only the copies, but also the calls.
Yeah. So what we decided to try and do was take some of those highest volume copiers and replace just those that needed it, and take some of the lowest level copiers and swap those around with some that are mid-level, So the new ones would be replaced in the high volume areas, and then some of the other ones would get shuffled around so that, in theory, when we hit the next 4 to 5 year point, we should have almost all of our copiers at about the same copy count when we're ready to do a full replacement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the new ones will be the new ones, and they'll be still new, you know, relatively new when we come back in a few more years. But we'll get more life out of the ones that have maybe low to medium by flipping them in the areas that they are. Because essentially, they all work the same. The interface is the same. In fact, the newer machines, Rico, what they're going to do is use the software that we're currently using, even though they have a different interface and could have a different interface, they can put the same interface that we use on our machine. So all the staff who are used to them will continue to use the same interface. And then when they're all updated, we can even upgrade the software and then teach everybody the new interface. But for the time being, it'll feel like to the user, nothing has changed, except what's changed is that machine with 2 million copies gets removed and we get some new machines.
Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. That's wise, because I know from being a teacher and being in the buildings, if you're not familiar with the copiers, it can be a real problem when you're trying to, get things done and running. So that way, if they can be adjusted so that they're similar for the staff until you switch over, I think that's a great idea. So thank you. for
Yeah, in
doing that.
addition to just the copiers in general, we have a lot of custom settings. If you've ever seen the way the display is on those, we've custom done that display for our schools, and over the years, custom designed certain functions of that for certain departments, and so all of that will carry over into the new copiers.
Oh, that's great.
Something I didn't mention is that this is from the My Deal contract pricing, so that satisfies the board's requirement for bidding. We are familiar with Rico. Rico is familiar with us. I think their service, because I know that my administrative assistant deals with them quite a bit with the toners and the service calls. They are very receptive and they are very responsive. Coming out same day many times, and this is $263,764.20 for the replacement of those 22 copiers that have 2 million or more on them.
Mr. Clan, I think this is probably answered in your first explanation of the formatting getting switched over. Will our teachers have to, I don't think that they will, because if I remember correctly, everyone uses their ID. Exactly. So they're not gonna have to mess with entering a password into a new machine or any other hiccups along that line.
No, the system that runs in the back end that controls all of that will be updated, but it'll be the same system, so all the information will still be there.
Okay, so the users aren't gonna see anything different at all?
They shouldn't, they shouldn't notice
That's my
anything
understanding,
different,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
And the thing I like, every once in a while, I'll forget my badge in my office and I'll be in front of the machine, but you can always still put your username and password in right on the
okay.
interface, so you don't have to go, running back. So I love it. It's a nice system.
okay, terrific. Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Tim, am I reading this correctly? We're getting 22 new ones?
Yes,
Are we eliminating the 22?
yes. The
Okay.
22 with the highest copy counts on them will go away and
Will
be
go away.
replaced with the new
Okay.
ones.
Generally, if there's 2 million or more, and when we say copies, or I say copies, it means prints or copy or whatever the case may be. So it's just the highest used ones is going to be replaced. Those 22 will go out, 22 new will come in. And then we're going to do a switcheroo and some
around.
others, shuffle some
Okay.
others to say, you know what, that one barely gets used. Let's swap it out with this other one that gets pretty good use but isn't at the same kind of number.
Now, the 22 that we're eliminating, do we give those back to Rico, or what do we do with those?
Yes, there's, I believe factored in there is whatever the value that still is on those copiers.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Any other, Mrs. Frank and then Mrs. Bonnefield?
Quick, the ones that don't get used, is there any talk of just eliminating those if they're a low use, to reduce the number that we have in the district, or?
They don't, so sometimes the ones that, I won't say aren't getting used, they just get used less. And Rico did a pretty extensive study of our usage in all the different areas to figure out which ones we should shuffle around, which ones should go where. they're placed in the buildings so that staff have access to them within a reasonable walk. So, you know, technically you could take some out, but it would put probably some undue stress on certain staff.
And I do
that-
believe that they took a look again at what we had and
Locations.
thought the locations were
Yeah.
appropriate. And think about this, if you're talking about 10% of the ones that are being removed at 2 million, you're still talking about, right, 200,000, you know,
Yeah.
it's getting use.
Yeah,
It's just not getting like
Heavy
high use because, you know, it's maybe in a large building in a back area, but 2 departments are all using it. And if you take that out of there, you go to a Stevenson or a Churchill, those are big buildings. You need to have them spread around. Mr. Johnson, $15,000, technically $15,100. It's in the exchange.
Exchange, okay.
Value.
All right, good.
Any other comments or questions on this item? I'm sorry, Mrs. Bonnefield.
That's
I forgot, I
okay.
apologize.
So I like this, when you first talked about replacing some of the machines, I immediately went to the replacement cycle, like with the buses and stuff like that. And then I'm assuming that the reason that we haven't started a replacement cycle for that, and that we're trying to use everybody as long as we can, I think that's a fantastic idea. I think is because the software will be updated, right? And so it's hard to be in a replacement cycle because it's you said there's a new interface with it. So the copiers are something, now that we have them all linked together, are something that we're going to really want to do on a regular hit them all at one time rather than cycle through on the replacement cycles.
yeah, if we make a full change to
Yeah.
all the copiers, we'd want to do all of them when we did that, if we were changing systems
Yeah.
in any kind of major way, yeah.
And then, is the interface is still, I'm assuming, I know, you know, if you put something out today, it's already obsolete kind of thing, it still works with our systems and it's functional, and there's not like some zippier, way better interface or anything like that going on. It's good to go.
Yeah, we
We're
did look
still
at,
up to date.
we did look at other options or what,
Sure.
and there are other versions of a similar, that
Yeah.
offer similar functions. But
Okay.
this secure print, as we call it, which allows the teacher to print, they just print, and then they can go to any copier in the
Okay.
district and swipe their badge and pick up their copies, or their prints at that time. That's a very commonly used system
Yeah,
still.
okay.
And there really
Cool.
there isn't anything else out there that offers greater benefit than what we're getting right now, especially
Like
once we.
mind-blowingly better.
Yeah,
Yeah,
especially once we
Yeah.
upgrade, is when we upgrade that system, you know, in place to the newer version of it, basically.
And I apologize if I missed this. Do we know, you may have said it already, how many years we'll squeak this out for? Like, this will give us another 3?
Rico's been pretty good about working with us too. So
Yeah.
if we go 3 or 4 years from now and ask them to review it again, or if we start seeing high amounts and high volumes of maintenance calls on machines, we can always trigger that as well.
But we think we'll get maybe another 3
Yeah,
years.
We did this, we got these machines in 16, I wanna say,
26,
16, 17,
26,
somewhere
yeah.
around there.
So we'll get 10 years out of
So,
them?
well, some of them might be longer if we go a few more years.
Yeah.
Some of them went this far, but again, it really matters where it's at. Location, I guess, in this.
I'd say another 3 to 5 would be
Yeah.
reasonable,
Yeah.
I think, depending on
Nice.
usage.
That's really nice, I think, and I know you've talked about, you know, paper reduction and, you know, time of people moving, you know, there's a lot of really good offsets to this purchase, other than just having, you know, decent copy machines. So this is fantastic, thank you so much.
And again, for those who don't know, because you haven't used them, they're not just copiers. They're copiers, they're printers, they're color printers, they're color copiers, they're scanners. They give us the ability, because it's linked into our network, that when I scan a document, I just hit the button, it scans, I pick up my paper and walk away. It then will go, depending on what I choose, either directly into a folder or via email directly to me. IT has set up some systems for integration into Microsoft Teams, where we're scanning large amounts of items, many, many files and folders can go directly into a special folder for a department like student services and whatnot. It really has a lot of capability. We only scratch the surface when all you do is run a photocopy.
And considering the complexity of it, it's a very solid system. You know, the number, if you think about the number of copies and scans and the amount of use that system gets every day, the uptime on it and is impressive.
And are we gonna talk about this at the regular meeting
This is
at all?
need to be voted on at the regular meeting, please.
Okay.
Mrs. Acosta. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say, it's almost $364,000 for this particular purchase of those 22.
Okay. Even though we're doing it with the pricing?
The pricing, we're okay because we didn't have to put it out to
For a
public
bid.
bid.
Got
The
it.
amount is slightly over the
Okay.
28,000
Sorry.
that we have to come with. I'll talk to Allison about raising that.
Sorry. All right, yes.
No, 100%, I get you.
Okay.
I followed you.
All right.
And Mrs. Acosta.
I was just going to add that I know that we mentioned that teachers won't notice. Teachers will notice. They will notice that they no longer have a copier that's jamming and that it's working more effectively, so thank you.
That's a good point.
Any other comments or questions? All righty. On to item E, purchase of Chromebooks.
Give me one moment to flip through that packet. Thank you. So, I wrote what's a little bit longer than what I normally write to you because I wanted to give you some background on this because I'm going to try to, both Mr. Clay and I are going to try to kind of collide two worlds here, including finance on this. So, just to throw out the first part of this is we knew that the 17-18 models of our Chromebooks are no longer going to be supported by Google. We know that they're going to need to go away at the end of the school year, so in the next couple of months. We're going to recycle them, and frankly, Mr. Klan got excellent pricing on the recycling for them. So with that in mind, we knew for quite some time that 5,500 Chromebooks would need to be replaced. So put a pin in that for a moment, and let's go backwards to the Emergency Connectivity Fund grant, the ECF, which the board had approved, and we purchased from that grant from the federal government. Remember that the Federal Communication Commission that grant ran through them. We purchased 8,000 via that grant Chromebooks, and those were specifically for home use by students who said, hey, I need one at home. And this was all COVID-based. This was all about wanting to make sure that students were connected because so many schools across the country had moved to either a hybrid or online or just simply so many things are going on virtually. Mom and dad are using the computer to work from home or have to do their work, et cetera, and they're on their own virtual meetings. So, hey, if you need something, the federal government wanted to make sure that we had the capability to put a device in their hand. So the district looked at what occurred when we first closed, and we said to all of our families, if you need a Chromebook, come to your school and pick one up. And we handed out about 8,000 of those at that time. This was spring of 2020 when everything began to close up. So when the ECF grant came around, when we talked about this last year, we knew that a year later we would be still in the back of our mind knowing we needed 5,500. So we said, it's logical to say if we gave out 8,000 once before, we might give out 8,000 again. And if we have a student who says, or a family that says, my child needs one, we wanted to have one for everybody who asked. So we also sort of figured way back there in our back of our minds, Allison worked with us on this and said we could always, quote unquote, buy them back from the ECF grant and then use them for our students in the classrooms, okay? So that's where we're at right now. In the program, we are still having families come pick them up. We had a sign-up sheet. We had given out about probably 3,100 to 3,200 at this point. I know we kept giving, I know that people had signed up. We had about 3,600 plus sign up and say yes. We were around 3,100 of pickups. we put out a communication that said, you need to pick them up if you asked for them. So we expect some more to go out the door. But mathematically, we figured we needed 5,500 new ones. So we got a quote for 1,500, because we figured even if we ended up miraculously going all the way up to giving away 4,000, we'd still have 4,000 left. We could buy 1,500 from Presidio, and we'd have our 5,500. Is everybody following any questions? Okay. So essentially, what we're going to ask for the board to approve is a not to exceed amount, which would get us, if we had to buy them all, 1,500. I don't believe that we're going to need 1,500 at where we're at sitting here today. We'll probably have given out less than 4,000. I can guarantee we're going to give out less than 4,000 from the ECF grant. Okay, so we'll take back all those other ones, and we'll then buy the same model from Presidio with their quote. And their quote is also from my deal. It's a per unit item. So just because they quote us 1,500, if we buy 800, it's still going to be the same per unit cost. So we don't have a concern to say, oh, we got a break because we broke over a certain number. So essentially, what we're doing here is replacing the 17-18 Chromebook model that we knew we had to do because Google will no longer support them. We're going to recycle those, get some dollars back, and then introduce this fall these 5,500 new Chromebooks. Whether they were originally purchased from the ECF fund or through the ESSER's dollars that we're going to pay for anymore from Presidio, these will all now be for in-class use for students replacing those other models. And to do this appropriately is we will be reimbursing the ECF fund through our ESSER funds. That way, because it was very specific that if those dollars were used to buy a device, that device had to be given for home use to a student. Since we're not doing home use only for that student, since it's going to be students will use them, but they use them in school, we want to make sure we're very appropriate with that and reimburse those dollars. So.
I'm just going to weigh in for a quick minute. You guys did a great job explaining something that is, a little bit complex. And also to say that multiple notices and communications have gone out in an attempt. Our goal really was to have these go to homes where they were needed. And our schools even did things like at incoming 9th grade night, had a table available where you could literally just sign up and take one home there to be able to use for your student at home through their high school years. So we tried some different events to have them available, put out notices directly from teachers, from principals, from the district. And it really is hard to determine why there is such a variance between folks who needed them at that point in time versus now. I think some of it is that, children can share at home, where when we were doing virtual learning, everyone really needed their own device. I think some of the feedback we've gotten is families, purchased their own and had opportunities to get them through other means over the past year or two. But it certainly has not been for lack of effort in trying to, we even really tried to say, needing one can simply mean you do not have a device per child. We did not put a threshold for that you had to meet free and reduced lunch guidelines. We really tried to be as clear as possible, but we also feel it is very important that we match the letter of the law on this. And so in order to utilize them in the classroom, we really do have to purchase them back. Thankfully, we had ESSER's dollars already set aside, so whether we're purchasing them from a stockpile we already have or purchasing them new, really the one thing it does is help us get them here quicker because we already have them in our possession. So we really wanted to be certain that whether anyone checks that in the future or not, we are able to clearly say, these are the amount we distributed, these are the people to whom we distributed them, and these are the remaining, and this is how we paid for them. So hopefully that gives you some background on our attempts to get this out. We wish we would have been able to distribute all of them, but that tells us that the need wasn't as great as we anticipated, but we still have the need within the district, and we'll continue on that cycle.
Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. So when you give them out to the families, is that like a yearly borrow, or they just keep them forever?
They can
They can
keep,
keep
they're
them.
theirs to keep.
Wow, okay. All right, and so they don't have to give them back. Now, the ones that you didn't use, the ones that were not distributed, they're brand new,
Brand
correct?
new in the box.
Now, do we have to pay ECF the, like the, whatever the price that they gave? If
Right.
there's no deal or anything, you pay full price for those?
Yeah, well, the grant, we got the deal, just like we get my deal. When we
okay.
purchased them, when we came to you a year ago, that was all, take the funding out of it, we got, the government didn't say, this costs X. We went out to Presidio, I think it was Presidio, actually.
Oh, you
No, it
went
was all
out-
covered.
you
It
went
was
out
all-
to
We went to
search.
all
Yeah.
covered, got the best price, got the
Oh,
contract
okay.
price, and brought it to the board approved. I think some of the confusion is the source, because we purchase those the same way we purchase over multiple years Chromebooks or laptops or anything like that. So we already got our good deal, and frankly, we're getting another good deal from Presidio, because they actually went lower than the My Deal price, because they wanted to make sure that they were the ultimate low price. So we're certainly trying to make sure that we spend as little as necessary when we get our machines. And really, in technology, you can get sometimes these guys to go back and forth and get a lower price.
So basically, we're just gonna write a check back to the ECF grant?
Essentially,
for
it's a
those-
transfer,
For whatever
yeah.
ones.
Yeah, I
Okay.
say the same thing. We're just
Okay.
gonna write a check. We're not really writing a check. We do the transfer, but yes.
Okay.
We're paying that back through the ESSER funds. And the ESSER funds were the funds that we had already set aside for those 5,500.
Okay,
We said from the get-go, here's the money for the replacement of the 17, 18 machines. We set aside enough in ESSER, so now we're simply utilizing those dollars. It's just a matter of where they're gonna go.
okay.
That's really what I'm
Perfect.
trying to make sure that
Yes.
folks at home understand, is if the ECF grant never happened, I'd be sitting here right now asking for board approval of 5,500 Chromebooks to replace the 17, 18s, regardless, using ESSER funds. So
Gotcha.
nothing really changes in that sense.
Okay.
And since I've got the microphone and I've got this topic, I want to thank, based upon the work that was done with those ECF grant fund Chromebooks, I want to thank Mr. Clan, I want to thank Mrs. Teresa O'Brien, I want to thank Paul Casada. They did a heck of a lot of work. And Linda McCormick at our front desk here, who was handing out, she was no one told her she was gonna have to do that. It just happened, and she took it on, and so all those people and more did a really, really good work with that program.
Good. Any other comments or questions? Mrs. Bonnefield?
Is there any chance that the new kindergartner registrations that can come in, have we?
We did discuss, and they aren't technically our
Not-
students until next year,
Okay.
and June 30th is
The
the
cutoff.
end game for this.
Okay.
And they have to have a district email address to be able
Okay.
to utilize them. So it was a great idea, we
Yeah.
thought the same thing.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah, you were like, wait a minute, I got a great idea.
It wasn't.
Good try.
But we did think that through, and unfortunately, it has to be by June 30th, and they will not be on our rolls by that time.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you guys went the extra mile to make sure that everybody in the district that needed one had the opportunity.
Along that line, what about young fives?
I think this was K, I think this was K.
I want to say that there were, some.
I
that-
believe they did have the
Yeah.
Did have it?
opportunity.
Okay.
Okay, because
Yeah.
they are our students.
They are our
Yeah.
students
Okay.
currently.
Okay,
See, good work.
yes.
Covered all their bases,
Yeah.
good job.
And I hate to go further down the rabbit hole here, but I'm going to. What about our preschool students that are our students? Would they not qualify because they don't yet have an LPS
They don't even
address,
know us.
email
Right,
address?
the devices, in order to be able to use the devices, you have to be able to log in with an LPS
Okay,
login, because we filter them,
okay.
just like we do our
By law.
devices in school.
Some savvy 3-year-olds could probably do it, but,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think they'd
but
be
we'll
savvy.
have to draw the line somewhere.
Before we move on, I just want to read out, and read into the record like I'm in, but Presidio is the vendor. $502,950 is the not to exceed that I would like to bring to the board to vote on. Again, it will be under that because I know that we're not going to give out the full 4,000. We're going to have more than 4,000 left, and we'll just, whatever that end number is, we've got April 28th, which is this Friday, is the last day for folks to pick them up. So by the time the board votes on this, we're going to turn around immediately, create the PO. We'll just look at the math and do the purchase.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Made a complicated thing pretty clear for us.
Thanks.
All righty.
You want to stay for boilers?
Yes.
It's hard to resist,
Are you
hard to
coming back?
resist that
Yeah.
offer.
Thank you,
Mr.
Tim.
Clan.
All righty, item F is the bid results for boiler projects. I am going to abstain on the discussion and vote on this, as happens periodically. My family's company bid to one of the companies that is going to be discussed tonight, so I will be abstaining from any discussion on this topic. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Francis.
Thank you. So we are down to it with the boiler project. This has been a sinking fund project that if we can harken back to 2016, I believe, we did the pilot at Frost. And they're still kicking. And it was very successful. We've had some changes along the way. We're still using the same manufacturer. They've had different products. We've been in schools as large as Churchill and schools as small as, some of our K4s, like a Rosedale. So our last two buildings that we want to replace those boilers is Cass and Nigiero. Cass, as you know, is still a LPS building, even though it does not run an elementary program. We do lease a portion of it, and then the other portion of it holds and houses our shared time English and then adult programs and our shared time programs. So we are going to replace that with the board's approval. The low bidder was Engineered Comfort Systems. I'm sure that might ring a bell. It's a company that has worked with LPS in the past. And that amount is, let me grab I have mine written out a little more. No, I've got it. So that amount is $437,264.48. And that includes not only the boilers at Nigiero and at Cass, but also providing and installing a generator at Cass. And I'll just take one moment to explain, we don't have a generator at Cass like we do at all of our other schools, because, if you recall, we did not renovate Cass via the 2013 bond. Those generators that we're now pretty much just used to having, and it feels like we've always had, we haven't. It was the 13 bond that was able to do that. So because Cass doesn't have this, Mr. Lau, the administrator of facilities and operations, said he really wanted to put one on there as well. It's got our programs, it's got childcare program in it. It's just a smart thing to do. So we put that into this, as an addendum into this bid. And all told out, if you look at the bid results, ECS was low responsible bidder like I said, $437,264.48. So that would be that portion of this project. And I'm just going to pause and see if anybody has any questions on the Cass Nigiero.
Any questions on this topic? No?
Okay.
All right.
So continuing on, a second part of this has to do with Kennedy Elementary. So Kennedy was done in 2019, I believe, and they put in, at the time, which was the standard item that we were putting into those school buildings, were two 1 million BTU boilers. We've had recently a failure of a boiler, and the warranty that's on them is a limited warranty, including parts only. And they don't manufacture those 1 millions any longer. So our conclusion in talking with the manufacturer, because we've been with them for quite some time, we've done all of our buildings with them, it's been very successful. This is really the first biggest hiccup that we've had. They said, look, we're just gonna give you a whole nother system. If you guys go ahead and pay to have it installed. We're just gonna give you a whole new system, and you can take those other ones out. And we thought that was actually a really good deal, because to have somebody come in and just try to get parts for this item that isn't manufactured any longer, et cetera, we've gone to this same system, which is actually, it's the EVO 599. It's a 3-pack. So in other words, instead of it being 2 boilers, it's almost the same exact amount of BTUs, but broken up into 3 boilers. And what we're finding is it's a nicer product for our schools, because you can actually run 2, just like if you need to. You could run 1. It's less than 1 million BTUs on those shoulder seasons when it's spring or later in fall, but not really cold. We can run just a single boiler, or we can run 2 boilers, or we can run all 3 of them on those -15 type of days. So it's a more efficient system. This is what they're producing now. It's one of their items, and that's what we've been putting in our schools. Mr. Lau and I talked about this quite a bit. He's very pleased at, having that as the replacement. Our plan would be to basically the one that broke down to just scrap, but we want to keep the other one for parts, because we still do have the 1 millions in some other buildings. So if we ever needed parts, we could then have our own parts to go back. So really, overall, it's $48,500, which is Systemp was the low bidder on that installation. So I am seeking approval for, that would be a labor-only type of item, because again, the manufacturer Hamilton is just going to give us the EVO 599 to replace what occurred with that one at Kennedy. And just preemptively to anyone watching at home, or for any of the board members who might think, well, gee, is that a bad system? They don't make it anymore. Is it gonna be problems? This is the first one that we've had a problem with. Remember the frost pilot I mentioned a little bit ago? Guess what's over there? 4 of those 1 millions, we've never had an issue, and they've been there since 2016. So we think it's just a one-off.
Any comments, questions from the board? And Mr. Francis, these will be handled all as one motion?
I'm going to handle this as one motion unless the board prefer I break them into 2. Really, I'm just looking at it as one overall boiler project for this summer. Is that
That's
okay?
fine.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next item is item G, purchase of microphones for Franklin PAC. Mr. Francis?
We're getting there. Franklin Performing Arts Center has had some difficulties ever since inception and purchase of their stage microphones for the students. It's had interference, and for several years, no one pinpointed what it was. Tried different models. They'd buy a couple of them, try them out. It would still have interference, and it's nothing that's systematic. It's more just periodic and frustrating. And if anybody's ever had an intermittent problem with anything, it drives you crazy, because you can't really pinpoint why it's happening. So long story short is that eventually the current PAC manager at Franklin narrowed it down. There's a nearby cell tower, and he truly believes that's what has been the issue. But that doesn't change the fact that the microphones that they've tried have not worked. Recently, I'm blanking on the play they just did.
Little Mermaid?
Little Mermaid. They had to borrow, they had a pipe burst in the PAC, and it ruined some things, namely some microphones, so they borrowed some from Churchill. And lo and behold, the Churchill microphones worked really well. And so,
Which are a different model.
which is a totally different model, right? And so they basically said, well, let's get those.
Did they give them back?
And we said, it's actually a pretty good idea. So essentially, we went out and got, I think we had 5 different quotes from different companies for the same item, and we're just gonna, they're all the same, so we're just gonna go with the low responsible, which is literally the low dollar amount. That would be a B&H Photo, and that's $41,858.98 to re-equip the Franklin PAC with their student microphones or stage microphones.
Okay, Mrs. Bonnefield?
Did we get any insurance money from the water damage?
I would have to ask Mr. Lau about that. Generally, we have a pretty high deductible, and if it doesn't meet it, we usually don't, if it was just a pipe burst. Now, I can't claim this on that because of what we're doing. If I were to just one-for-one replace the same microphones, which for insurance purposes you would, it would be
Right.
a fraction of this, because it's not all the microphones,
Okay.
and it's an older model.
Okay,
So it's not the $41,000.
yeah,
Of course, we would make our deductible there, but I can't use this.
Got it.
Because it'd be much, 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 much less if I
Okay.
just replaced a few microphones.
Gotcha.
okay,
Mhm.
thanks.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Is this a general fund purchase?
Yes,
Okay. Thank you.
and unless Mrs. Smith has a different design as we get to it, I'll put that into, obviously, the resolution, but that is my initial as a general fund, because we don't have a special PAC fund. It's usually just a general fund for student equipment, et cetera.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes, I was just noticing on the Sweetwater bid, there's a warranty, whole paragraph, but there's nothing on the B&H. Is there any warranty that comes with that? Like this one says a free 2-year warranty, unlimited technical support. Do we have anything with are they offering any B&H? I guess I don't need an answer right now, you can get back to me, but
I will. I'm
does
gonna-
B&H offer any type of warranty or technical support? So if this happens, if there's some intermittent issues?
It's a great question, and I will, so we had the PAC manager, he had the connections with the places. I'll contact him back and ask
Yeah.
if he could reach out to B&H. If there's a major difference in something, if they say, well, we'll give you that for X, and it makes them go over somebody else, I might just, I'll have to make a decision
Okay.
before the board votes on that, okay?
Okay.
But it's a great question, and we'll check into that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? And this will go on the regular agenda
regular
for
one,
next week for vote. Okay. All righty. That brings us to the end of Building and Site.
Thank you,
very
everybody.
much for all of your information, Mr. Francis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Then that'll take us to item 5, our curriculum committee, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you, President Johnson. And for item 5A, we have the annual education report, and Mrs. O'Brien is going to lead that.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I am passing out our most recent annual education report. As you know, this is a state-required document. It is one of our accountability measures that we are required to do every year. There was a pause for a few years with COVID. Last year, we started collecting the data and reporting it through our annual education report. There were some things that were omitted because of COVID. So this is our district annual education report. We also have school annual education reports, so every one of our buildings has to have one, and all of these are posted on our websites. So there used to be a state law requirement that you had to present at each building at a PTA meeting or a public meeting. That is no longer a part of this requirement, but having a copy available to any parent who would like one is still the state requirement. So we're required to post it on our website, and then we're required to have one available to anyone who asks. So this is a summary of all of our schools' annual education report, in addition to some of our localized data. So I'm just gonna walk you through a little bit of it. So page 1 is our opening letter. There's a template provided by the state of Michigan that we have to follow that tells us the main part of this letter that we provide. So it just goes over what the purposes is and what the data that is shared through this document. Page 2 is the beginning of our listing of our key initiatives for each one of our schools. So one of the things I wanted to bring your attention to is the description above our table of each one of our schools' key initiatives is the description of, by the state of Michigan, Every Student Succeeds Act. There is different layers of support. A school could be required to be identified based on their scores, We have no schools that have been identified for neither targeted support or comprehensive support or additional targeted support. So we had one school a few years ago. They've come off of that list. So as you see in the chart, we have a column that says whether a school is labeled. That's part of the requirement in this document. And so each one of our schools writes a paragraph about what they're working on. And so then we take each one of them, and the next several pages goes through each one of our schools, starting with elementaries and then going to middle and high schools. Many of them are similar, so we're working on very similar things: elementary, MTSS, putting in our guaranteed and viable curriculum, writing instruction. As we move through the upper L's and the middle schools, identifying their subgroups and what they're working on to close the gaps with their students. So at your leisure, you're more than welcome to read all of these descriptions of each one of our schools' targeted areas of improvement. Do you want to stop for a second?
Mrs. Byrne.
Obviously, a lot of this whole report, I know we have to utilize templates for. Did our principals get together and make sure that they're writing about similar things? Or, I mean, like, how did the paragraphs come to be? Because they're obviously written from the perspective of each independent school, but at the same time, they're covering a lot of the similar themes.
Correct. So in past years at a principal meeting, they might go over what they're all working on. So it's similar to sharing their school improvement plans. And they talk about what they're putting into their cover letter. So this paragraph comes out of their cover letter for their annual education report. So there's a lot of collaboration. Again, we're working on many of the same things at each level, and so there's some consistency there. There's also some buildings that like writing it themselves in their own way, and so, that's their choice.
Okay. And frankly, I think it is good if they're collaborating on this. It helps you make sure you're not forgetting something you may have overlooked, or make sure that things are covered thoroughly.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so page 8, at the end of all of those charts, is just the end of our description with a paragraph written by our superintendent about our focus areas that we are working on as a district. Page 9 is has many required elements, so it's a description of the demographics of our districts, or our students and our employees and our staff members. So we gather how many students we have, enrolled in what levels, how many teachers we have, the degrees that they have. So this is a description of the students and staff that work in our district. Each year we update that. One thing I should have said, I was planning on saying at the beginning, but also with our data, so this is based on last year's data. So that's the thing about annual education report. It is April, and this is based on last June's data. So as I have presented over the last several months, several different accountability measures, they're usually 6, and this one, almost 10 months behind. The next several pages is our mission and our shared vision and our collective commitment. So we utilize that in our annual education report. Page 16 describes our vision for school improvement, how we utilize the school improvement process as a results-driven process to increase student achievement. Our district level improvement efforts are based on our district mission statement and shared vision, but we also base it on what our school improvement goals are. So we state our shared vision, and then what our areas of our priority areas for the next 3 years are there. The next section is our academic goals. As I've shared with you before, we have switched over to the MyKIP school improvement platform. And we are transitioning to that, and so we have a pretty lengthy, in-depth reading, writing, and mathematics goals. Our other content areas we are layering in as time has gone on. So we have a measurable objective under reading, writing, and math. So our goal is always for all of our students to achieve college and career readiness. These are 3-year goals that we set, and then we typically, and I encourage schools to do the same thing, have a measurable objective to close the gap with whatever subgroup is the area that they want to work on. And so for our district, we typically list all of the subgroups as the groups because each one of our schools has their own group that they're focusing on. So that's how we usually write those goals. Then after that, we have our previous set of goals, which, as you can see, they were very targeted, but not very lengthy, and we didn't list the measurable objectives. And so all students will be proficient readers, all students will be proficient writers. And that is the overarching goal, but digging into measurable objectives helps you to be looking at that data. Following the 18 to 2021 goals is a description of our district school improvement team. So we rewrote that, so it's redefined as our Vision Forward team and the work that we're doing. So that's stated in our annual education report. We talk about accreditation, and then our internal review process of our choir team is on page 17. Page 18 and 19 and 20 is just a description of the goals of each content area, K through 12. So it's taking all of the standards and just summarizing them for each one of those content areas for our district. If you turn to page 21, this is where we typically list our local assessment data. So your state assessment data is provided by My School Data. It's typically just a link at the end of your annual education report, and it lists all of our state assessment scores. These are what we utilize locally to then, create that look at what does it look like if I'm looking at M-STEP, what other measures do we look at locally? And so we have a new one for our young 5 and 4-year-old preschools of identifying letters and rote counting. This came from Dr. Dodge's PA 48 goal. And so we decided to add it as a part of our annual education data that we'd like to continue to look at that each year. We have our early literacy benchmarks for kindergarten, so that's letter identification, letter sounds, and rhyme. One of the other state requirements is that you must put 2 years' worth of data in your annual education report. And at the top of the district developed assessment, there's a statement that the 2021 data was a year where many parents chose to opt out, not just out of state data, but many with iReady and other locally sourced data. So that's a statement at the top of our scores just for all of them. The third set of charts is running records. So one shift that has occurred over the last 12 months, well, it occurred last year, but so we used to give the Fontes and Pinnell running record assessment 3 times or more a year. In an attempt to grow our teachers' use of running records as a formative assessment, we give the official Fontes and Pinnell at the beginning of the year, and then throughout the year they give local shortened running records that help drive their instruction. So I took off in our annual education report that these scores are the Fontes and Pinnell official scores because some of them are Fontes and Pinnell, some are strictly using our literacy footprints and our teachers doing a running record based on the book that they're teaching the students. So that's where those scores come from. Anyone need a pause? Yes, sir.
Question. under the running records assessment grade K through 4, it says percent of students that performed at or above grade level. What are they performing at? I mean, what are we testing at that point? What are they performing at that's at grade level or above?
Reading. They're at their reading level, their grade level, reading level, or above. So that's something I can, change, that it's the reading level.
Okay, because then when I look at the iReady, if I just look at the grade 4 in the running records, and then go to grade 4 under the iReady, there's a tremendous drop in the percentage. What would account for that?
There's lots of things that account for that. So iReady is a computer-based program that adjusts based on the answers a student gives. Those scores are students who are at mid-grade level or above, so it could be at mid-4th grade and above at iReady. The running record is done one-on-one with a teacher, so there's that comfort with the teacher, there's that relationship with the teacher, so a student may try to work a little harder on unknown words, might, be able to have that conversation about what's the comprehension of the book that we're reading, where with iReady, for the most part, most students are doing that independently on their own.
I would add too that it's the type of test also, right? Running records is a one-on-one reading out loud. They're not actually, the iReady is on the computer. So it's, it doesn't highlight every student's best way of learning or demonstrating their ability.
And I think too, in iReady, there are multiple areas. There's phonics, phonemic awareness, and all of those different pieces, where with the running record, it's primarily word identification and then some comprehension. So the iReady looks into, again, 2 totally different assessments in the way that they're given, but also even the areas that are tested.
On the next page, at the top is the middle school iReady scores. As you can see, they're pretty stagnant and probably not where we would want them to be. They, again, the older students they might not put the same effort into them, having taken them already. But we've kind of reinvigorated our focus on iReady at the middle school this year. Our MTSS team supported our teachers when they gave it, helped analyze their data and help support teachers with utilizing that data. So I did just go into iReady and look at their last assessment, so their mid-year assessment. So grade 7 ELA was 50% at mid or above, and 8th grade was 47. So I look forward to seeing the end of the year assessments. Sometimes kids go back down after the mid-year, but I am looking forward because there has been a concerted effort with that assessment this year. And then, as you can see, our iReady math results for the past 2 years for both elementary and middle school. And the math, the math middle school, so I looked at those for the last assessment. It was 38% for 7th grade and 35% for 8th grade. So I have my fingers crossed that it's not too warm in June when kids are taking this assessment.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
And when we're looking at these percentages, where do we stand in comparison to like statewide? Are these numbers consistent with what other schools are seeing?
So iReady doesn't give you a statewide average. At the beginning of the year, they usually come twice a year and go through our scores, and they typically compare us to national, because not everyone in the state uses iReady, not everyone. So it's a national look at other districts that utilize it. And as I've shared here before, right after COVID, they were impressed with our growth and wondered what we did. We were high above the amount of growth other districts had made during COVID. But I will get you that information and look at the last time they presented. I'll pull up their slides and look at that.
Thank you. I just feel like that context sometimes helps to digest what we're looking at. Mrs. Frank?
Does it, along with that, whenever you look at the state numbers from the My School data, are we trending because that's all statewide, right?
Yes.
All of that, are we above or below, I think, in that data?
In our MSTEP data and
Yeah.
so we have been trending up at the K4s and either stagnant or going down in 5 through 11.
Okay.
Not significantly, and we have a few little variations. Again, I have a lot of belief that this year we've refocused on our common summatives, teachers choosing their priority standards per course, per grade level, which are aligned to the state standards. So I definitely feel like we are on a different track for our teachers. This contract gives them PLC time consistently to be looking at how their kids are doing. We're piloting mascot time. So we have so many things in place that I'm very hopeful. Our COGAT scores are at the bottom of page 22. So that is a norm reference test we give at 6th grade and 8th grade. This year, we only gave it at 6th grade. So next year, we will only have scores for 6th grade. So 8th grade is a grade that we give lots of state tests. So they have science, social studies, reading, and math. And so they were asking for relief to not have as many areas to test. And COGAT is an ability test, and so it certainly shouldn't change drastically in 2 years from 6th grade to 8th. So we are going to give it at 6th grade and utilize those results in middle school also. Something new on page 23. So I wrote a summary about state assessments. We typically follow 8th grade PSAT because it's part of the MME from the state of Michigan, and then 11th grade SAT. But we might internally look at 9th and 10th grade SAT. And so one of the things in the work that we've done this past year is that alignment, and those tests are aligned, PSAT 8-9, 9-10, and the SAT. And so we talked, and we're going to utilize that as one of our measures in our annual education report. And so Mr. Hillard helped pull those scores for the past 2 years so that we can use this as a beginning year to really utilize that data better to help our teachers see that connection from 8th grade to 11th grade, that we actually do have some steps that we can be looking at and saying, are we utilizing in our ELA classes and in our math classes things that are aligned to the SAT.
So I have a question, and I don't know that this is on here, even something to even address at this point and when we're discussing this, but in terms of the test schedule for, I have an 11th grader, and I was just kind of shocked of the amount of testing that's happening within the 2 to 3 weeks in April. And so is this just the window for all these tests? Okay.
And the state actually assigns specific days for some of those tests that they must be given on.
Okay.
11th grade SAT has a specific date across the state. Now that may change next year. We're actually moving to an online version of the SAT next year. And so it may go back to be a little bit more open, like the M-STEP window is 6 weeks. 3rd grade M-STEP ELA needs to be given first so we can get those retention letters for any students who meet that threshold. But schools create their own testing schedule. So an 11th grader not only has to take SAT, but also has to take the science and the social studies. any common
work
summative
keys.
assessments, and work keys.
Yeah,
a
so
lot.
yes, it's a lot. And so I wonder sometimes how that impacts, you know.
That test fatigue
Sure
is
it
real.
does.
Yeah.
Without a doubt it does.
And another piece was, I know that parents question sometimes, and it's just worth mentioning, why their student that is on a trade school path has to take these tests in order to graduate. So I know that that's something that is usually talked about. So just clarification on why this is one of those requirements, and for them, because it impacts the whole school and the score as a whole. And some of them, you know, have been advised, don't even worry about it. You're just taking this as a requirement because you have to take it, but not really focusing on what the outcome of the results of their tests.
Yep. And the SAT, our state standards are aligned to the SAT. So it's just like taking the fourth grade ELA M-STEP. According to the state of Michigan, that test is aligned to the fourth grade standards. State of Michigan, college and career ready standards are aligned that if you take these courses to 11th grade, then you should be aligned with the SAT. We have found that that's not 100% based on our scores, that doesn't necessarily have an even match sometimes. And I do think there's, you know, people who question whether the SAT is the right. We used to give the ACT, and now we give the SAT.
Yeah, and I'll say that I even recently had a high school student that is represented on Vision Forward talk about colleges and how many of them are not requiring the SAT or the ACT, and that they're relying on other factors. And so, you know, she was talking about the relevance of that for students if they know that that isn't going to count. And so really it is something that as we look at these scores, we know they impact students in different ways. And so that's just another factor, hearing directly from our students, knowing that in some cases they're going to need that for college entrance, and in other cases they're not, and how might that impact their mindset, you know, going into the testing. So I appreciate it. It was a good conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then at the bottom of page 23 is we're required each year to collect the percent of parents and the number of parents that attend parent-teacher conferences. So we have to share that number and percent for 2 years. And then we write about our relationship with our PTSA in our schools and some of the other programs on the top of page 24 that we work with our PTAs on. Then you are required to share all the specialized programs that you offer in your district. So we choose to write about them at each level, so elementary, middle, and high school. We're required to share what buildings are Title I each year, so we share that. Then we link our parent involvement policy into our annual education report so that we share with our parents who are looking at this that we do have this policy. And then the last page is just the same review that's in the cover letter of what data is available through My School Data that is linked. So that last sentence where it says My School Data, Livonia Public Schools, that's a link on the live version of this document on our website.
Ms. Burton?
Yeah, Mrs. O'Brien, can you remind me what the threshold is for a building to be Title I?
It has to be below the district average of free and reduced. So it's the threshold within your district. So if a school is below the district average, they're identified as Title I.
Okay. So it's not, I thought at one point it was a certain percentage of students.
So when
That
I
were
was
free
the
and reduced
principal
ones.
at Hayes, we were above 40%, so I applied to be a school-wide Title I. You have to be above 40% to apply to be school-wide.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Our average is somewhere around 36%, 34%, and so the schools that are above that. And then we make the determination whether we utilize all the elementaries that are above that line, or all the elementaries and middle schools, but, so we make that determination. We also utilize state 31A funds, which is also at-risk funds, to support other schools that are not identified as Title I. There aren't as many restrictions with 31A funds that there are with federal funds with Title I.
Okay, so for a building to be a Title I building, it has to be above the average of the district.
Correct.
Okay, interesting. So that could be very different, district to district.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, for Mrs. O'Brien?
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so
This
much
is
for
your-
the
this is
explanation.
even when you follow a
We have one
template.
more, Mrs.
Sorry.
Frank.
Just in terms of a couple things, I would be interested in learning just a little bit more about what we're doing with some of these numbers, like, and I don't know if that's offline or if the whole board, like on a, not study session, what do you call that? Like
workshop.
Workshop?
Yes, a workshop, and just some of these like low areas that, is it more, is it the curriculum? Is it, curriculum we're utilizing? Is it, and if I'm the only one, it can be offline. I don't know what the rest of the board thinks. But, is it curriculum? Is it textbooks? Is it teacher training? Is it, where is it that regardless of where other, places fall, I think that our role as educators, I think in terms of being on the board this is one of the most important things that we do. And I know some of it is testing, and there's just no perfect testing out there, especially standardized testing. There's just nothing out there that's perfect. But I would be interested just to know, how we're targeting some of these lower areas and where we're looking to make some improvements with different methods.
Yeah, happy to do that.
One thing I might suggest as well, and Mrs. O'Brien has been spending quite a bit of time this year. As you know, we've added data points to a number of our different study sessions, and I think it's certainly something worthy of us continuing to delve into. And I think we also found it very helpful at our last study session that was hosted at one of our schools to hear specifically how they were using data and targeting some of those areas of students in need. And so I think one of my suggestions will be, as we go into the coming school year, if President Johnson would still like us to schedule, and the board would like us to schedule some of those in schools, I think it's also helpful to hear from specific schools where they're targeting some of their subgroup populations where the data is either flat or falling, and what some of their special and unique initiatives are, because we can certainly give that from a district perspective, but I also think I would really like for you to have the opportunity to hear some of the tremendous efforts being made at individual schools to target the needs of the students that they serve and what that looks like. So maybe we could have that be a portion of those presentations, is really with that question in particular. Where do you see those areas? And they've identified what some of those are. And then how are you addressing them, and what are you seeing from that? And so whether that's secondary schools talking about the implementation of mascot time, or any of our schools talking about what their PLTs are using as far as data and what they're looking at, how they've modified their common summative assessments, and really started to target areas where many students are falling down and what they're doing about that. To me, that would really put it in context for you as a board. So if that's something you're interested in, that would be something we could really ask them to do when we're out there.
Great idea.
And, go ahead, Mrs. Bonnefield.
Sorry, this is kind of off the subject, but if we have IDD in the policy in here, is there any way we can look at refreshing that? It's older. It's an older policy. Just look at refreshing it, just so we can update that and put a more current date on it. And there's probably some verbiage in here that's changed in the last 10 or 12 years related to parent and guardian and stuff like that we might want to refresh it for the current verbiage before we get since it's so public. I mean, that doesn't sound right. It's all, we can get to all the policies, but this one specifically is printed in an additional document.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Good idea.
And I was just gonna add this last point. I know sometimes when we look at these numbers, it's discouraging, but just a reminder, this is last year's information, and we know that a lot of work has gone into this school year in putting in resources to address a lot of these areas, and so we're looking forward to seeing how those come out. So, thank you. Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. I just wanted to say again how much I appreciate the ability to follow cohorts when we have multiple years listed and we can actually track the same students over time. To me, that's very meaningful, so thank you for doing that. And I forgot to turn this off.
Mrs. Burton?
And thank you for you and your entire team for putting this whole thing together. Even though there are templates, sometimes that makes it easier, sometimes it makes it more difficult to express what we really want to express. Regardless, this is a lot of information from a lot of buildings. So thank you very much for putting it together and making it very easy for anyone to pick up and understand.
My pleasure.
Thanks again, and that concludes our curriculum committee report.
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. That'll take us to item 6, our policy committee, and Mrs. Frank.
Good evening. We are going to review IFD, and Mr. Itu is going to share with us. And Ms. O'Brien?
We're both going to join you.
Fantastic, both of you.
Good evening, everyone.
She wanted to come back.
She did.
He invited me,
I
so
did.
I felt
Said
like I
join
needed
us.
to come back and sit next to him.
We are shoulder partners. I'm bringing to you tonight the removal of IDFA board policy and some edits to board policy IDF. Both of these are related to instructional programs and interscholastic activities. What we're doing is basically combining 2 policies into one and going to keep it labeled as IDF. So board policy IDFA, the one we're looking to remove, had 2 paragraphs. We're bringing that over to IDF, in which paragraph 1 of the new IDF and paragraph 3 of the new IDF are the 2 paragraphs from the old IDFA. Got that? And the original IDF is that middle paragraph with a couple of edits. If you'd like to take a minute and review it. And I have hard copies if you do need one.
Does anyone have any questions or comments about the updates? Mrs. Burton?
I've got a few. Obviously, we're combining activities and athletics into one, which I think is a great idea. There are a couple of suggestions that I would have because it's, to me, as long as I've been doing this, I had to reread it and find out, are we talking about, like specifically when we're talking athletics, are we talking about JV and varsity level athletics, or are we talking about intramural athletics, or, I mean, I had to reread it myself a couple times to discern that. And finally, when you got to MHSAA, clearly that tells me, okay, we're talking
That's the
about.
interscholastic.
Exactly. But I don't know that other people may have caught that, and that was the meaning. What I would suggest is, I like the idea of putting these all together, of having activities and athletics covered in one policy. I would suggest putting the 2 red paragraphs together and having them be paragraphs 2 and 3. Right, and pulling up the largely unedited paragraph and make that paragraph 1. And then in the current paragraph 2 that reads, the Board of Education recognizes the need for extracurricular and interscholastic activities. I would say activities and athletics. Because we're really talking about two different things. They kind of fall under one umbrella of extracurriculars. And the reason I think we should add the words "and athletics" into the current paragraph 2 is that the rest of that paragraph applies to both athletics and activities. I mean, failure on the part of any student to meet their responsibilities is cause for suspension or removal. That applies to not just non-athletic activities. It applies to the whole group of extracurriculars.
It's all encompassing.
So I would suggest that. Yeah, I would pull the current paragraph 2 up to paragraph 1. So we're talking about everything. And then paragraphs 2 and 3 are talking a little bit more specifically about athletics and MHSAA. And then up at the top, I would just suggest adding "and athletics" to the title, interscholastic activities and athletics. So people are not looking for, okay, that's activities, where are athletics, and not realizing that they're now in one policy.
Thank you for the suggestions. Appreciate it.
Does that make sense, everyone?
We'll
Mrs.
make those
Acosta?
changes.
This is just aesthetics. I would remove one of the spaces before every sentence. There's like too much spacing, but
That's easy. We can do that.
Any other comments or questions?
We got
Ms. President Johnson?
But in the second, what we're showing here is the third paragraph, where we say in conjunction with this review, the board delegates to the superintendent or designee. Don't we generally say "or his/her designee" in other policies?
No,
We
in
don't?
current motions, in current day board work, we use "her" because that's the current state of affairs. In board policy, we say superintendent or designee now in all updated
all,
policies,
okay.
rather than putting in his or her.
Okay.
It just will state superintendent or designee. So only in documents that are meant to be for that moment in time do we actually use a her designation
Okay.
or any designation, as opposed to just simply saying designee.
Okay.
Anything else? Any other comments, questions about the removal of IDFA or IDF? No? We'll put that on the agenda for the meeting,
for
for
first
first
reading.
reading.
With changes as noted.
With
Yes.
changes. Thank you.
Okay.
I can stay with you.
Perfect. Okay, our second policy is Board Policy IFD, Library and Media Centers and Classroom Libraries. Mrs. O'Brien?
Thank you. We talked about this board policy about 2 months ago, and then this past month, we talked about the administrative procedures that go with this one. So this particular board policy, we would like to add classroom libraries. So it would read Livonia Public Schools School District establishes library media centers to provide and promote the intellectual, cultural, social, and ethical development of students, and to provide resources which extend and deepen the experiences encompassed in the curriculum. Library and Media Center materials are determined through a process based on the American Libraries Association, guidance for selection of books and other materials of learning which contribute to the growth of individual students. Selection for classroom libraries follow the same guidance criteria.
Any suggestions, comments?
Looks good.
No? Okay. And just for everyone, are you going to go over the, okay.
So we don't vote on this, but I would like to go over administrative procedures. Just, we talked about them at the study session, and so I want to make sure I represented our conversation. So we changed the title of those. We missed catching some of the instructional material centers last time, so they're library media centers. So we wrote a purpose statement at the beginning of the administrative procedures, so that that is stated there. And the objectives for material selection, so again, that one is mostly stands as it has. And then we updated the School Library Bill of Rights. So instead of stating it word for word, since there were pieces of it that didn't apply to us, Instead, we said based on the American Library School Bill of Rights, and then we have those listed on page 2. We have the responsibilities for material selection. And then we changed the criteria, so there's several pages that we're pulling out, and again, have utilized the American Libraries Association's criteria for selection, which is cited on the last 2.5 pages. This was a group of media specialists and administrators that worked on this particular administrative procedures.
Any comments or suggestions on the administrative procedures? No. I just have one question. That first, the responsibility for material selection, it just says the Livonia Board of Education is responsible for materials selected for its schools, curricular materials, books, and digital libraries, including LMC materials. Help me with that one. Because library materials don't come before the Board of Education, or under the top, do you see where I am? Under the, I don't know what page I'm
Are you on
on.
administrative procedures?
So-
Yes,
yep, she's
yes,
on
under
procedures,
objectives
page
for
2,
materials, yeah, do you see where I am?
the back of page.
Yes.
Right.
It's in
So-
blue on
And so
page,
that's the way it was stated before, and that wasn't something
right,
that.
that you changed.
Yep, but we can.
Thoughts or suggestions? It just, to me, doesn't seem like that is something that comes before the Board of Education. It is something that we designate, right?
But
Designee.
It does say, or their designee, so quite frankly, it's pretty much the designee that is doing all the responsibility, you know what I mean? I think.
Yeah. Mrs. Bonnefield?
And I also think that we set the policy, so the ultimate say-so comes from the Board of Education based on the fact that we write the policy, and our designees are following our policies, is where that's coming from.
Would that be helpful, because the following,
Yeah.
the subsequent sentence says, "The superintendent and principals operate within policies
Yes.
determined by
Yes.
the board." So would it make sense in the first sentence to say, "The Livonia Public Schools Board of Education," not put "or their designee," "is responsible for policies related
Yes.
to material selection"?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
That's
because
right.
we're not
Yes.
actually, yes.
And
I
then
think
we're
that's great.
responsible for operating within those policies.
Yes.
And then it goes on to further delineate who
Yes,
Yes.
it is,
Yes.
what responsibility is
Yes.
actually delegated.
Yes.
Does that make
Yes.
sense?
That
Yeah.
makes so
That
much
would be
more sense,
great.
yes.
Yep.
I just think it's more clear to the public
Right.
of,
yeah.
we're not
yeah.
sitting here looking at each book, and I know it says
Right.
designee, but
Yeah.
each book and determining whether or not it's, right, that is for our
You're right,
educators.
We're kind of all encompassing.
So
Yes.
we would take out "or their designee," and we would put the word between "for" and "materials" is responsible for policies related to material selection.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I like that a lot. Mrs. Burton, did you have a question, or was that taken
Nope,
care
I
of with
was
that
just-
one?
I was just
Okay.
agreeing with you that I hadn't caught that, but
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
We can't say we're responsible for selecting them if we
Yeah.
don't ever
Select
select
them,
them.
yeah.
But I really like the rewrite.
Right,
Mrs. Owen.
because I do agree, Mrs. Bonnefield, that we do set the policy, I agree with that,
Right.
but it just sounds a little bit here like we're actually looking at books, and we're not. So,
Yep, that rewrite will
not
take
our
care of it.
role, right, stay in our lane.
No, that's
Um,
great. I think that second paragraph also is an important one under this section about how the families are encouraged to monitor their students' selection of library materials.
Right.
That their expectations
Yep.
in regard to book checkout should be discussed with their student, and, that they help their student choose books that fit what they
Right.
would like.
Right.
So that new paragraph also fits well with that.
I agree. And giving the parents the ability and the freedom, right? Everyone has different choices, and everyone has different priorities in their family, and so we need to be respectful of that. But I love that you put that in there, because we do want to respect people's choices as families.
And because of that, I think that last line that says, "Books may be returned to the library at any time
Yeah.
if a student or parent objects to the content, because you're right, for some families it may be appropriate, and they may be ready
Yes.
for a particular content or storyline or something, and maybe another parent may not.
Right.
And so rather than no one having access to it, we really are encouraging that conversation
Yes.
with your children to
Right.
say, and why we sent the letter describing to parents, how do you have access to what your children have access to,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
being able to have those conversations
Yeah.
with them is really, really important, and we want to be respectful of that entire range of family values and opinions, et cetera.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's great. Oh, Mrs. Burton, I'm
Just
sorry.
For the benefit of the public, Mrs. O'Brien, you hit most of the points in that paragraph, but if you don't mind, I'm gonna read that paragraph, just that one.
Yep.
Because this is important to parents. And again, this is one paragraph out of many, but this is specifically talking about parents and any books their children are checking out. Livonia Public Schools families are encouraged to monitor student selection of library materials, and in parentheses, based on their individual family values, end parentheses. Family expectations regarding library books checked out by a student should be discussed with the student by the parent/guardian and reviewed as necessary to ensure that the student understands their family's expectations. Books may be returned to the library at any time if a student or parent objects to the content. So I think it's very well written, and I appreciate it, and I think it's important that parents understand that is part of our policy, or part of our administrative procedure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Mrs. Bradford?
Along those lines, not only the library books, but teachers' individual classroom libraries, should that be included in there? So that they know that, because we do know that many classrooms have their own extensive materials, books in their room. Is that something that should be maybe addressed in that paragraph also? Not just the library book, but
Yep.
any classroom materials?
Yeah, we added that to this policy, so yes, definitely we need to delineate, make it clear.
Okay. Yeah, because
Thank you.
that could come up, especially in teachers' individual libraries.
Correct.
That brings up another question, and I don't expect an answer here, but maybe if we put that classroom materials, does that open up the question, like if you give me a book, you assign a book for me to read, that I can object to that? Is there, and maybe this is a get back to me, is there an option for parents to say, I don't want my student to read that book?
Yes, so
no,
especially
no.
in secondary,
Right, yeah, secondary. I'm talking more about secondary, like if
Yes.
it's assigned from an ELA teacher.
we have a second book for every, so usually if they're reading a novel, there's a theme that's aligned to our curriculum.
Right.
And the teachers all have a secondary book that fits that theme.
You know,
And so at open house or curriculum
Yeah.
night, it should be shared what their novel, we've been updating novels
Yeah.
this past couple of years, so,
Yeah.
some of them are the ones they've used before, but we've been adding new ones as we updated Study Sync,
Yeah.
and now we're writing our middle school curriculum. So there's always an opt-out for a school read and a secondary book that's aligned to that same theme.
That is fantastic. I didn't know that. And my kids, my oldest just graduated last year, and I never knew that. So I think that's fantastic. And maybe when we present this and read at the next board meeting, when you say classroom material, I don't know if it'd be appropriate to maybe just mention that, like if there is an objection, or maybe not. You guys can discuss that amongst your cabinet team. But I think that that's great that there is. I didn't know that there was an option. So I think if we put classroom material in there and there is an objection, there is an option. Yes, Mrs. Burton.
We're talking classroom libraries, not
Correct.
classroom materials.
Yes,
Because
she was-
this
yeah.
policy is about library materials.
Right, but when Mrs. Bradford said to add classroom libraries.
Classroom libraries.
So classroom
Yes.
libraries
Yes.
is like
Yeah.
independent reading
Yes.
choice.
Yeah.
You asked a
Yep.
question about novels that are aligned to the curriculum.
Yes,
Which is
okay.
covered in a
Yes.
different policy.
Correct.
Yes,
It is
got
a
it.
But
different
it is
policy.
important.
Yes, got it,
Yep.
got it. Perfect. Anything else? Any other comments, suggestions?
So we'll be bringing the policy for a first read, but we won't do the
Correct.
administrative procedure separate.
Right. And we won't discuss the administrative procedures, or we will? We won't discuss
No.
it?
No.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. that concludes policy.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. That'll take us to item 7, our Personnel Committee. Mrs. Bradford.
We do not have anything this evening, do we, Mrs. Oquist?
We do not.
Okay, we're all set, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradford. That'll take us to item 8, our Legislative Committee, and Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you, President Johnson. There are currently no agenda items under the Legislative Committee. Mrs. Oquist?
No, we are continuing to communicate regularly. There's a lot happening regarding education-related legislation, but nothing specific to report tonight.
Thank you. That's all, President Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. And that looks like it has brought us to the end of our agenda. And it was a good agenda, good discussion tonight. Thank you. So we will say good evening, and we'll see you next week.